Brother, if you are a connoisseur of scary stories, then subscribe to my channel so as not to lose it and give it a like. I will be grateful to you. A slight tremor ran through his body as he sat in the car, the engine now silent. The soft pitter-patter of rain on the roof seemed amplified in the stillness of the night. He lowered the windows, allowing the cool, damp air to seep in, a mix of earth and rain filling his lungs. He turned off the lights, enveloping himself in darkness. Reaching into the armrest, his fingers brushed against the cold, metallic key. He gripped it tightly, feeling its weight, a tangible reminder of what lay ahead. Outside, the world was shrouded in darkness, broken only by the faint glistening of raindrops. He could barely make out the silhouettes of the surrounding summer houses, their windows dark and lifeless. The rain was a steady whisper, masking any distant sounds. He strained to listen, his ears attuned to every rustle, every drip, trying to gauge if anyone else was awake in the settlement. The isolation was a double-edged sword. It meant fewer prying eyes, but also a heightened sense of vulnerability. Any noise he made would stand out in the oppressive silence. Inside the car, he could feel his heartbeat quicken, each thump resonating through his chest like a drumbeat of anxiety. He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself, to quell the rising tide of nerves. This wasn't his first job, but the fear never fully disappeared. It was a constant, gnawing presence, a reminder of the stakes. He needed to focus, to calm down and plan his actions with precision. In the dim interior light, he opened the glove compartment and retrieved a small flashlight. Its beam was narrow, just enough to light his path without drawing too much attention. He visualized the interior of the house, recalling the layout, the possible hiding places for valuables. Mentally, he rehearsed his steps unlocking the door, moving silently through the rooms, leaving no trace. He imagined himself as a shadow, unseen and unheard. The rain intensified slightly, the soft patter turning into a more insistent drumming. He shivered as the cold seeped through his thin jacket, urging him into action. There was no turning back now. He opened the car door slowly, wincing as it creaked, and stepped out into the night. The chill bit into him, the rain immediately soaking his hair and clothes. Every nerve in his body was on high alert as he approached the cottage. The ground was soft and slippery underfoot, making each step a careful endeavor. He reached the porch, his heart pounding louder in his ears than the rain. With a deep breath, he inserted the key into the lock. The click of the tumblers sounded deafening in the quiet night. He pushed the door open and stepped inside, the darkness swallowing him whole. He took a moment to steady his shaking hands and switched on the flashlight, its beam slicing through the gloom. He was inside. Now, the real work began. The gate creaked softly as the protagonist eased it open, its rusty hinges protesting even his careful movements. He winced at the sound, pausing to listen for any signs of life. The night remained still, the gentle drizzle masking the faint creaks and groans of the old house. He slipped through the gate and made his way across the small yard, the damp grass muffling his footsteps. As he reached the door, he turned on the flashlight again, its weak beam illuminating the old, weather-beaten wood. The lock clicked open, and he stepped into the corridor, switching on the light. A dim, yellow glow filled the narrow hallway, casting long, eerie shadows. The autumn chill permeated the air, seeping into his bones. He took a moment to gather himself, his breath visible in the cold air. The house was just as he remembered it, filled with the scent of old wood and dust. He knew exactly where he needed to go. The hidden stash of his late Aunt Luda, a secret she had taken to her grave, was tucked away in a small, forgotten room at the back of the house. He and his mother had lived frugally, always scraping by, and the knowledge of the hidden treasure had been a small comfort in difficult times. Now, it was a lifeline. As he moved through the house, his steps careful and deliberate, he couldn't shake the nagging feeling of guilt. He knew what he was doing was wrong. Breaking into his aunt's house, taking what wasn't rightfully his, it gnawed at him. But he justified his actions with memories of the poverty they had endured, the struggles they had faced together. His mother, too proud to ask for help, and he, too young to provide any. He reached the small room, its door slightly ajar. The light from the corridor barely penetrated the gloom within. He stepped inside and shone the flashlight around, illuminating the old furniture covered in white sheets. His aunt had been a secretive woman, always keeping things to herself, and it was no surprise that she had a hidden cache of valuables. He approached the old wardrobe in the corner, its once polished surface now dull with age. He remembered his aunt's vague hints, her cryptic words about a hidden place. His hands trembled as he felt along the edges, searching for the hidden latch. When his fingers found it, he hesitated. The weight of his actions pressed heavily on his conscience. He was about to steal from his own family, from a woman who had been kind to him in her own way. But desperation outweighed guilt. He and his mother needed the money. This was their chance at a better life, a chance to escape the cycle of poverty. With a deep breath, he pressed the latch, and a small compartment popped open. Inside, as promised, was a collection of jewelry, old coins, and a stack of cash, more than enough to make a difference. As he gathered the items, he couldn't help but feel a pang of sorrow for his aunt. This was her legacy, hidden away from the world, and now he was taking it. But in his mind, it was a necessary evil. The lines between right and wrong had blurred long ago, and all that mattered now was survival. With one last look around the room, he pocketed the valuables and made his way back to the corridor, ready to leave the haunted memories behind. He knew he had to act quickly. The thought of Aunt Luda's other relatives discovering the hidden stash gnawed at him. They didn't yet know where it was, but they would eventually. His mind raced with the possibilities of what might happen if they found the money first. They would claim it without hesitation, leaving him and his mother with nothing. His window of opportunity was closing, and he had to seize it before it was too late. As he quietly made his way back to the car, he clutched the bag filled with jewelry, old coins, and cash close to his chest. Each step felt like a step deeper into a moral abyss, but he couldn't afford to hesitate now. The rain had slowed to a gentle drizzle, barely more than a mist, but it was enough to send a chill through him. He reached the car and opened the trunk, carefully placing the bag inside. Just as he was about to close it, a voice startled him. "Vanya, is that you?" He turned sharply, his heart racing. Standing under a streetlight was Nadia Kolesnikova, a distant cousin and longtime family friend. She approached with a concerned expression, her umbrella shielding her from the rain. "Nadia," he greeted her, forcing a smile. "What are you doing here?" "I could ask you the same," she replied, her eyes narrowing slightly. "How's your mother? I heard she's been unwell." His mind raced. He couldn't tell her the truth. "She's in a sanatorium," he lied smoothly, hoping his voice didn't betray him. "Getting some rest and treatment. She needs it." Nadia's expression softened with sympathy. "I'm so sorry to hear that. I hope she recovers soon. It must be hard on you." "It is," he nodded, trying to keep his tone steady. "But she'll be all right. The doctors are taking good care of her." Nadia's gaze shifted to the open trunk, and he felt a pang of panic. "What are you doing out here so late?" she asked, her curiosity piqued. "I was just picking up a few things from Aunt Luda's place," he said, closing the trunk more forcefully than he intended. "You know, some old keepsakes. Thought it might cheer Mom up when she gets back." She nodded slowly, seemingly satisfied with his answer. "I understand. Family memories can be a comfort, but you should be careful out here, Vanya. It's not safe at night." "I will," he assured her, eager to end the conversation. "Thanks for your concern, Nadia." She gave him a small, tight smile. "Take care, Vanya, and give my best to your mother." "I will," he repeated, watching as she walked away, her figure gradually fading into the misty darkness. He exhaled deeply, the tension easing slightly from his shoulders. He quickly got into the car, started the engine, and drove off, his thoughts racing as fast as the car on the wet road. He had managed to avoid suspicion for now, but he knew he had to move fast. The stolen treasures were a temporary solution, and he needed to ensure they were used wisely to secure a better future for him and his mother. As the rain continued to fall, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched, that Nadia's curiosity might bring more trouble than he anticipated. But for now, he focused on the road ahead, the headlights cutting through the darkness, leading him away from the haunted memories of Aunt Luda's house and towards an uncertain future. As autumn settled in, the summer house cooperative had become a ghost town. The once lively area was now abandoned, the vibrant colors of summer replaced by the dull, muted tones of fall. The dirt roads had turned into muddy, treacherous paths, nearly impassable after weeks of rain. Vanya drove slowly, his tires slipping occasionally in the muck. He scanned the houses, looking for any signs of life, but saw none. The windows were dark, the gardens overgrown, and the air was filled with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. He needed to be certain. Parking the car under a canopy of overhanging branches, he slipped out and walked the perimeter of the cooperative. His footsteps were muffled by the soggy ground. He checked each house carefully, peering into windows and listening for any sounds. It seemed the owners had indeed abandoned their summer retreats, retreating to the warmth of their city homes for the season. Satisfied that he was alone, Vanya made his way to the Kolesnikov house. It stood at the edge of the cooperative, a slightly larger and more imposing structure than the others. He knew it well enough. He had played there as a child. The familiarity only made his task slightly less daunting. Vanya paused at the front door, listening intently. The silence was complete, the only sound the rustling of leaves in the breeze. He took a deep breath and began to work. He had brought tools with him, old and worn but reliable. He inserted a thin crowbar into the gap between the door and its frame, using it to pry the door loose. It groaned in protest, but he applied steady pressure until the hinges gave way. He carefully removed the door from its frame, the heavy wood feeling solid and cold in his hands. Setting it aside, he took a brick from the pile he had gathered earlier and used it to prop the door open. This would keep it stable and silent, preventing any accidental noise that might draw attention. The house smelled of dust and mildew, a stale combination that made him wrinkle his nose. He shone his flashlight inside, the beam illuminating the once cozy living room. Furniture was covered with white sheets, like specters in the darkness. The Kolesnikovs had clearly prepared the house for a long absence, but Vanya knew there were valuables they hadn't taken with them. He moved quickly, his nerves on edge. He checked the usual hiding places under mattresses, inside closets, behind picture frames. His heart raced with each passing minute, the fear of being caught mingling with the excitement of finding something valuable. In the master bedroom, he found what he was looking for. Behind a loose floorboard, hidden beneath a stack of old newspapers, was a small metal box. His hands trembled slightly as he pried it open. Inside, he found cash, jewelry, and a few documents that looked important. He stuffed everything into his bag, trying to ignore the nagging voice in his head telling him this was wrong. But there was no time for second guessing. He needed to get out before anyone returned, before anyone realized what he had done. He retraced his steps, making sure to leave everything as undisturbed as possible. Once outside, he carefully replaced the door, using the brick to hold it in place. Vanya hurried back to his car, his breath visible in the cold night air. The bag felt heavy with the weight of his actions, but he knew it was a necessary burden. As he drove away from the cooperative, the headlights cutting through the darkness, he felt a mixture of relief and dread. The roads were slippery and treacherous, but he navigated them with determined precision. The Kolesnikovs might discover the break-in eventually, but by then he and his mother would be far away, their lives hopefully changed for the better. For now, he focused on the road ahead, the rain-soaked autumn night cloaking him in its shadows as he disappeared into the distance. Vanya walked slowly and cautiously towards the Kolesnikov house, each step deliberate and measured. The fear of being caught gnawed at him, making his heart pound in his chest. He glanced around constantly, eyes darting to every shadow, every rustling leaf. The cooperative was deserted, but the thought of someone watching from the darkness, waiting to expose him, filled him with dread. He kept to the edges, blending into the shadows as best he could. Reaching the house, he took a deep breath and tried to steady his nerves. He inserted the thin crowbar between the door and the frame, working it carefully. The door creaked, protesting loudly in the silent night. He froze, listening for any sign that someone had heard, but the only response was the soft patter of rain. Slowly he pried the door open and slipped inside, closing it gently behind him. Inside, the house smelled of dust and mildew, an unmistakable sign of its abandonment. The air was stale and cold, and the faint light from his flashlight revealed furniture shrouded in white sheets. The place felt frozen in time, as if the Kolesnikovs had simply vanished, leaving everything behind. Vanya moved through the hallway, the beam of his flashlight sweeping over the familiar but eerie surroundings. Each creak of the floorboards sent a jolt of fear through him. He knew the layout well, but tonight it felt alien and foreboding. He started with the living room, lifting the sheets to reveal old, worn furniture. Nothing valuable there. He moved on, his breath visible in the chilly air. In the kitchen, he opened cabinets and drawers, finding only dusty dishes and tarnished silverware. Every noise seemed amplified, echoing through the empty house. He paused frequently, straining to hear any sign of another presence. The fear that someone might be hiding, ready to catch him in the act, made his skin crawl. He moved to the bedrooms, his tension growing with each step. The master bedroom was his primary target. He remembered the loose floorboard where the Kolesnikovs might have hidden something valuable. But first, he checked the smaller rooms, peeking under beds and inside closets, expecting at any moment to find someone lurking. His flashlight beam quivered, reflecting his shaky hands. Finally, he reached the master bedroom. The room smelled musty, the sheets covering the furniture adding to the sense of neglect. He approached the spot he remembered, near the old dresser. Kneeling down, he pried up the floorboard. His heart pounded in his ears as he revealed a small metal box. He opened it, finding cash, jewelry, and documents. He quickly stuffed them into his bag, trying to ignore the moral weight of his actions. As he stood up, he heard a noise. His heart stopped. It was faint, like a footstep, but in the silence of the house it was deafening. He switched off his flashlight, plunging the room into darkness. He stood still, holding his breath, listening intently. The fear that he wasn't alone, that he had walked into a trap, was overwhelming. After what felt like an eternity, the silence returned. He cautiously turned the flashlight back on, the beam trembling as he made his way back to the door. Every step was a battle against the urge to run. He knew he had to remain calm, to not make a sound. Reaching the door, he carefully replaced the floorboard and eased out of the house, his nerves frayed and senses on high alert. He closed the door behind him and took a deep breath, the cold night air filling his lungs. He walked back to his car, still moving slowly and cautiously, constantly glancing over his shoulder. The fear of being caught still lingered, but he felt a sense of grim determination. He had the valuables, and now he needed to get away. As he drove off into the night, the rain-slicked roads reflecting the headlights, he couldn't shake the feeling that someone had seen him, that his secret was not as safe as he hoped. The haunted memories of the Kolesnikov house would follow him, a reminder of the price he paid for survival. Vanya approached the door to Aunt Lyuda's old room, his heart pounding in his chest. The room had always felt different, even when she was alive, filled with an air of mystery and something darker he couldn't quite put his finger on. He hesitated, the memories of a recent dream surfacing in his mind. In the dream, Aunt Lyuda had appeared to him, her face gaunt and twisted with rage. She reached out with skeletal hands, her eyes burning with an intense hatred. He tried to run, but his feet felt glued to the ground. She dragged him down, her grip like iron, pulling him into the cold, unyielding earth. He had screamed for help, pleaded with God, but the only response was the cold silence of the grave. The memory of the nightmare made him shiver. He took a deep breath, trying to shake off the unease, and pushed the door open. The room smelled stale, like old paper and dust. The furniture was covered with white sheets, ghostly shapes in the dim light. He stepped inside, his flashlight casting long, eerie shadows on the walls. As he moved through the room, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. The silence was oppressive, each creak of the floorboards echoing loudly in his ears. He searched methodically, opening drawers, looking behind furniture, but found nothing of value. The sense of unease grew with each passing moment, his nerves fraying under the weight of his fears. The dream lingered in his mind, making his skin crawl. He could almost feel Aunt Lyuda's cold, bony fingers reaching for him again. He forced himself to focus, knowing he couldn't afford to let his imagination run wild. He needed to be thorough, to make sure he hadn't missed anything. He moved to the next bedroom, his steps hesitant. The door creaked as he pushed it open, revealing another room shrouded in darkness. He swept the flashlight around, illuminating the bare walls and empty bed frame. The room was cold, the air thick with dust. There was nothing here, just the haunting emptiness that seemed to pervade the entire house. Vanya's anxiety mounted. The house felt like a tomb, each room a silent reminder of his aunt's passing. He opened closets, checked under the bed, but there was nothing. The growing tension gnawed at him, making him jump at every small sound. The fear of the unknown, of what might be lurking in the shadows, was almost too much to bear. As he finished searching the last of the bedrooms, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was missing something. The house was too quiet, too still, and the memories of his dream continued to haunt him. The image of Aunt Lyuda's furious, ghostly visage was burned into his mind, her hateful eyes watching his every move. Exhausted and on edge, Vanya left the room, his body trembling with fear and adrenaline. He had found nothing, but the real terror lay in the realization that he might not be alone. The house, with its dark corners and silent rooms, felt alive with the ghost of his aunt, her presence a constant, chilling reminder of his guilt and desperation. As he made his way back to the living room, he knew he had to leave soon. The valuables he had found earlier would have to suffice. The longer he stayed, the more the fear consumed him, and the more he felt the icy grip of his aunt's ghost closing in around him. The atmosphere in the house was suffocating, heavy with an unsettling silence that seemed to press against Vanya's chest. Every creak of the floorboards, every sigh of the wind outside, amplified his unease. He knew logically that the dead don't bite, but the stillness around him felt ominous, as if the very air held a whispered threat. In the dimly lit hall, his flashlight beam caught something on the table, a framed photograph obscured by a black ribbon. He approached cautiously, his heart pounding louder with each step. As he lifted the photo, Aunt Lyuda's stern visage stared back at him, frozen in time. Her eyes seemed to pierce through him, accusing and disapproving. The black ribbon seemed to signify mourning, a somber reminder of her passing. Feeling a chill run down his spine, Vanya turned the photo face down on the table, unable to meet her gaze any longer. "I'm sorry, Aunt Lyuda," he whispered, the words barely audible in the oppressive silence. Desperate for a distraction, he moved towards the window. The rain continued to fall steadily outside, its rhythmic patter a stark contrast to the eerie quiet within. With trembling hands, he pushed open the window, welcoming the sound of the rain as it filled the room. The fresh, damp air brought a small measure of relief, dispelling the suffocating stillness that had weighed on him. Turning his attention back to the task at hand, Vanya knelt beside the loose floorboard he had remembered. He had done this before, years ago, when Aunt Lyuda had shown him the hiding spot and made him promise never to reveal it. Now, circumstances had changed, and necessity drove him to unravel the secrets buried beneath. Using a small pry bar, he carefully lifted the edge of the floorboard. The wood groaned softly in protest, echoing in the silent room. With meticulous care, he worked the floorboard loose, revealing a small space beneath. Inside, nestled among old papers and forgotten trinkets, lay the treasures Aunt Lyuda had hidden away. Vanya's hands trembled as he gathered the valuables, his mind racing with guilt and apprehension. He knew he was betraying her trust, desecrating her memory with his actions. But the weight of his mother's mounting medical bills and the looming threat of eviction left him with little choice. Closing the floorboard carefully, he replaced everything as he had found it, trying to erase any trace of his intrusion. The rain outside continued its steady cadence, a stark reminder of the passage of time and the inevitability of consequences. As he stood up, his bag heavy with Aunt Lyuda's secrets, Vanya couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. The air in the room seemed charged with an unseen presence, Aunt Lyuda's disapproving gaze lingering in the shadows. With one last glance around the room, he hurried out into the night, leaving behind the haunting memories and the weight of his choices. As Vanya knelt in the dimly lit basement, his hands trembling, he heard a sudden, jarring sound that echoed through the silence like an explosion. His heart leaped in his chest, panic seizing him like a vice. The noise seemed to reverberate in his ears, magnified by the eerie stillness of the house around him. He froze, his breath catching in his throat as he strained to listen for any movement, any sign that he was not alone. The basement seemed to close in on him, its shadows dancing menacingly as if concealing unseen threats. Desperate for reassurance, he turned to the icons hanging on the wall nearby. Their familiar images of saints and angels offered a sliver of comfort in the oppressive darkness. He reached out, touching the cold glass of one icon, silently praying for protection. With renewed resolve, he gripped the icon tightly in one hand and continued his task. The floorboards and shelves in the basement were old and creaky, each movement sending shivers down his spine. He worked methodically, his mind racing with thoughts of the impending danger he sensed closing in around him. Every creak of the wood, every rustle of debris under his hands, amplified his anxiety. As he dismantled a shelving unit, his nerves were on edge, his senses heightened to the slightest sound. The fear of someone entering the house and discovering him intensified with each passing moment. The basement felt like a trap, its stale air thick with the weight of his guilt and the unknown dangers lurking in the shadows. His flashlight flickered momentarily, casting erratic shadows on the walls. Vanya's hands shook as he reached for another board, his movements becoming more frantic with each passing second. The realization dawned on him that he was nearing a critical moment, the descent into the cellar. His mind raced with scenarios of what might await him there, scenarios that grew more terrifying with each heartbeat. But he couldn't afford to hesitate. The pressure of his circumstances, the urgency of his need, compelled him forward despite his mounting fear. With a deep breath to steady himself, he focused on the task at hand, the icon in his hand offering a fragile shield against the encroaching darkness. The basement seemed to hold its breath as Vanya continued his work, the silence now thick and oppressive. Every sound he made echoed ominously, reminding him of his vulnerability. He prayed silently for strength and protection, his thoughts a jumble of fear and determination. As he finally removed the last obstacle and prepared to descend into the cellar, his heart pounded in his ears. The fear of what he might find below, coupled with the ever-present dread of being caught, threatened to overwhelm him. But he had come too far to turn back now. Gripping the icon tightly, he took a deep breath and stepped into the unknown depths below, steeling himself for whatever lay ahead in the dark recesses of Aunt Luda's hidden sanctuary. With trembling hands, Vanya lifted the lid of the small, ornate box hidden beneath the shelving unit in the cellar. Inside, nestled among velvet cushioning, were bundles of cash and sparkling jewels. Relief washed over him as he realized his efforts had not been in vain. Yet, even as he gathered the valuables into a bag, a growing unease gnawed at him. The weight of his actions settled heavily on his shoulders as he hastily transferred the treasures. Each movement was deliberate, fueled by the urgency to leave no trace of his intrusion. He carefully replaced the box, adjusting it to its original position under the shelves, ensuring it sat exactly as he had found it. His mind raced with the importance of maintaining the facade, of preserving the illusion that everything remained undisturbed. As he worked, the sensation of being watched intensified, a chilling presence that seemed to hover just beyond his senses. The cellar walls felt like they were closing in on him, the silence now deafening in its intensity. His pulse quickened, his breaths coming in shallow gasps as he fought against the rising panic threatening to consume him. The conflicting emotions within him were overwhelming. On one hand, there was the thrill of discovery, the relief of finding a solution to his desperate financial plight. On the other hand, there was the relentless fear of exposure, of the consequences that would surely follow if he were caught. The fear mingled with a sense of guilt, knowing he had violated the sanctity of his aunt's memory. With the bag securely packed, Vanya stood in the dim light of the cellar, his mind racing with thoughts of escape. He clutched the bag tightly to his chest, the weight of its contents a stark reminder of the choices he had made. Every noise, every shadow seemed to taunt him, amplifying his sense of impending doom. Steeling himself, he ascended the stairs, each step echoing loudly in the silent house. The fear of discovery propelled him forward, urging him to move swiftly yet silently. He reached the top, his heart pounding as he paused to listen for any sign of intrusion. The house remained eerily quiet, as if holding its breath in anticipation. Vanya slipped through the darkened rooms, his senses on high alert, his ears straining for the slightest sound. The feeling of being watched persisted, a haunting presence that followed him like a shadow. Finally, he reached the door, his hand trembling as he turned the handle. With one last glance back at the house, he stepped out into the cool night air, relief washing over him like a wave. The rain had stopped, leaving the world bathed in an eerie stillness that mirrored the turmoil within him. As he made his way to his car, Vanya couldn't shake the feeling that his every move was being scrutinized, that the eyes of judgment were upon him. He drove away into the darkness, the weight of his actions heavy on his conscience, haunted by the knowledge that he had crossed a line from which there might be no return. As Vanya huddled in the darkness of Aunt Lyuda's house, he strained to hear the approaching footsteps that echoed ominously through the stillness. Fear clenched at his throat like a vice, paralyzing him with dread. He knew deep down that it couldn't be Aunt Lyuda herself, she was gone, but the thought of someone discovering him sent shivers down his spine. With trembling hands, he switched off his flashlight, hoping desperately to remain unseen in the shadows. The footsteps drew nearer, their rhythm steady and methodical. Vanya's heart pounded in his ears as he pressed himself against the wall, willing his breath to remain silent. The house seemed to hold its breath, every creak and rustle magnified in the oppressive silence. Then, a voice broke through the darkness, a whisper, soft yet filled with an unsettling familiarity. Vanya had called, sending a chill down his spine. "Why are you here?" The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end as he recognized the voice. It couldn't be real, it was impossible. Yet there she was, Aunt Lyuda's apparition standing before him, her presence palpable despite the veil of shadows. Her eyes bore into him, piercing and accusatory, as if she could see into the depths of his soul. Panic surged within him, threatening to overwhelm his senses. He clutched the icon tightly in his hand, a lifeline in the face of the supernatural. "Forgive me, Aunt Lyuda," he whispered, his voice trembling. "I had no choice." Her spectral form seemed to flicker, a mixture of anger and sorrow crossing her features. "You dishonor my memory," she intoned, her voice carrying a weight that shook him to his core. "You betray everything I stood for." Tears welled in Vanya's eyes as he struggled to find words of explanation, of apology. But before he could respond, a sudden noise outside startled him. The spell seemed broken as Aunt Lyuda's ghost faded into the darkness, leaving him alone with his guilt and fear. With shaking hands, Vanya fled the house, stumbling into the cool night air. He ran blindly, his heart racing, until he reached his car and sped away into the safety of the night. The road stretched out before him, but his mind remained trapped in the haunting encounter with Aunt Lyuda's spirit. Returning home to his mother's waiting embrace, Vanya collapsed against her, his body trembling with exhaustion and emotion. He knew this night would haunt his dreams, the specter of Aunt Lyuda's disappointment lingering like a shadow over his conscience. Yet, as he held onto the icon, its smooth surface cool against his skin, he found a glimmer of solace. He believed in its protection, in its power to shield him from harm. In the midst of his turmoil, it offered him a thread of comfort, a belief that he could find redemption despite his transgressions. As he drifted into an uneasy sleep, Vanya clung to the hope that one day, the memory of this night would fade, replaced by the reassuring presence of the icon and the belief that he was safe from the darkness that had briefly consumed him. Vadim drummed his fingers on the steering wheel, his frustration mounting with each passing minute. He and countless other drivers were trapped in a gridlock, their cars forming a metal snake that wound its way down the congested road. The cause of the traffic jam was soon apparent: a nasty accident up ahead. Emergency vehicles flashed their lights and workers moved with the urgency that only a serious collision could warrant. Vadim sighed deeply, feeling the weight of the day pressing down on him. Suddenly, a brilliant flash of light tore through the evening sky, momentarily blinding everyone in its path. Vadim squinted, trying to make sense of what he had just seen. Before he could process it, a deafening roar followed. He craned his neck to look out the window, just in time to see a massive object hurtling toward the ground. It crashed with such force that it sent a towering plume of dust and debris into the air, obscuring everything in a murky cloud. Panic rippled through the line of cars. Drivers honked their horns, shouted, and scrambled to maneuver their vehicles out of the jam. creating an even more chaotic situation. Vadim's heart pounded as he fought to maintain composure. The scene around him was pure bedlam. People abandoned their cars, running in every direction, their faces masks of terror. He gripped the wheel tightly, scanning for a way out. He needed to get home, away from whatever had just happened. He found a small gap between two cars and deftly maneuvered his vehicle into it, inching forward as fast as he dared. The sounds of panicked voices and screeching tires filled the air, merging into a cacophony that spurred him to move faster. Finally breaking free from the worst of the traffic, Vadim sped towards his apartment. His mind raced with questions and fears, each more unsettling than the last. What had just fallen from the sky? Was it safe to be outside? He pressed the accelerator harder, wanting nothing more than the relative safety of his home. Once inside his apartment, Vadim immediately turned on the television, his hands trembling as he fumbled with the remote. The news channels were already covering the event. A stern-faced anchor relayed the information, the words tumbling out in a hurried, anxious tone. An unidentified object has crashed in the industrial zone of our city. The Ministry of Emergency Situations (MECAS) has stated that it is likely a meteorite. Residents are advised to stay indoors and await further instructions. Vadim stared at the screen, his mind reeling. A meteorite. It seemed plausible, but something about the situation felt off. The sheer scale of the explosion, the intensity of the light, it didn't match his understanding of a typical meteorite impact. His unease grew as he watched footage of the crash site, the area cordoned off with emergency personnel swarming like ants around a disturbed nest. He paced the room, his thoughts a tangled mess. The official explanation did little to soothe his nerves. What if it wasn't a meteorite? What if it was something else entirely, something more sinister? His imagination conjured up images of all the things it could be, none of them comforting. The news anchor continued to speak, but Vadim barely heard the words. His mind was elsewhere, lost in a labyrinth of fears and uncertainties. He couldn't shake the feeling that his life, and the lives of everyone around him, had just been irrevocably altered. Vadim leaned back in his chair, glancing once more at the television before switching it off. He shrugged off the news, dismissing it as a minor incident that would be resolved by the authorities. The anchor's dire warnings and the footage of the crash site did little to disturb his evening routine. Settling in front of his computer, Vadim immersed himself in a world of online games and social media, effectively tuning out the world outside. The hours slipped by as he chatted with friends and conquered virtual challenges. Any lingering thoughts about the object that fell from the sky were pushed to the back of his mind. It was probably just a meteorite, nothing to worry about, he reassured himself. The next morning, Vadim was jolted awake by the persistent blare of his alarm clock. He groggily reached for his phone, noticing several missed calls and messages from friends. Curious and slightly apprehensive, he turned on the TV, immediately bombarded by the grave expressions of news anchors. Authorities are reporting widespread water contamination following last night's incident. Residents are urged to avoid tap water due to a series of severe poisoning cases. Hospitals are overwhelmed as more victims seek treatment. Vadim's stomach churned as he listened to the updates. This was no minor incident. He rushed to the kitchen, turning on the tap and watching the clear liquid flow, now looking menacing rather than refreshing. The urgency of the situation hit him hard. He needed to get bottled water, and fast. Throwing on some clothes, he hurried to the nearest store. What he found there was chaos. Shelves that once held rows of bottled water were now nearly empty, and a line of anxious shoppers snaked through the aisles. People jostled and argued, desperation evident in their eyes. As Vadim stood in the seemingly endless queue, he noticed a familiar face ahead. It was Slava, an old friend from school. They hadn't seen each other in months, but the shared crisis brought a sense of camaraderie. Vadim waved, and Slava stepped out of line to join him. "Crazy, isn't it?" Slava said, shaking his head. "Who would have thought we'd be fighting over water?" "Tell me about it," Vadim replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "I thought it was just a meteorite. How did things get so bad so quickly?" "They're saying it contaminated the whole water supply. People are getting sick everywhere. We should probably stock up on other drinks too, just in case." They spent the next half hour inching forward, the tension in the store palpable. When they finally reached the front, the bottled water was long gone. They grabbed whatever they could juice, soda, even sports drinks, anything that could keep them hydrated. As they loaded their haul into their bags, Slava turned to Vadim. "Why don't we go to your place? It might be safer to stick together until we know what's really going on." Vadim nodded in agreement. "Good idea. At least we'll have plenty of juice to tide us over." They walked back to Vadim's apartment, the weight of their conversation and the bags of drinks heavy on their minds. The streets were eerily quiet, the usual morning bustle replaced by a tense, uneasy calm. Once inside, they set the drinks down and collapsed onto the couch, the reality of their situation sinking in. "Do you think it's really just a meteorite?" Slava asked, breaking the silence. "I don't know," Vadim admitted. "But whatever it is, it's turned our lives upside down. We need to stay alert and be ready for anything." The two friends sat in quiet contemplation, the uncertain future stretching out before them like a shadow. The once familiar city now felt like an alien landscape, filled with unknown dangers lurking just out of sight. Vadim and Slava sat in the dimly lit living room, the flickering glow of the television casting eerie shadows on the walls. The news was a constant background hum, detailing the ongoing crisis. The conversation inevitably turned to the object that had crashed the previous night. "You think it could be a UFO?" Slava asked, a note of genuine curiosity in his voice. "I mean, it's not every day that something like this happens." Vadim shrugged, though the idea had crossed his mind as well. "I don't know, but it's hard to believe it's just a meteorite. The way it lit up the sky and the impact, it felt otherworldly." Before they could delve deeper into their theories, Slava suddenly clutched his stomach, his face contorting in pain. He bolted from the couch and dashed to the bathroom, leaving Vadim frozen in shock. Moments later, the sounds of violent retching echoed through the apartment. Slava emerged from the bathroom, pale and trembling. His usual robust demeanor was replaced by a fragile, ghostly pallor. He took a few unsteady steps towards Vadim before collapsing onto the floor. Panic surged through Vadim as he knelt beside his friend, trying to rouse him. "Slava." "Stay with me," Vadim shouted, his voice thick with fear. When Slava didn't respond, Vadim frantically grabbed his phone and dialed emergency services. The minutes felt like hours as he waited for the ambulance, his mind racing with worst-case scenarios. When the paramedics finally arrived, they worked quickly, assuring Vadim that Slava's symptoms were consistent with severe food poisoning. Despite their reassurances, the sight of Slava being wheeled away on a stretcher filled Vadim with dread. As the hours dragged on, Vadim couldn't shake the feeling of impending doom. He turned on the television, hoping for some update on the crisis. What he saw only deepened his anxiety. The news was now reporting a disturbing pattern among the poisoned headaches, rashes, and symptoms eerily similar to rabies. Experts were interviewed, their grave expressions doing little to calm the public. They spoke of increased aggression, confusion, and in severe cases, hallucinations. The screen flashed images of crowded hospitals, doctors and nurses moving frantically among rows of patients exhibiting the telltale signs. Vadim's thoughts kept drifting back to Slava. Was he experiencing these symptoms too? The idea that his friend might be suffering alone in a hospital was unbearable. Vadim's own head began to throb, a dull ache spreading behind his eyes. He tried to dismiss it as stress, but the paranoia gnawed at him. He glanced out the window. The streets, once bustling with life, were now desolate, as if the city itself was holding its breath. The few people he saw moved quickly, heads down, a tangible air of fear hanging over them. Vadim's mind raced with questions and fears. Was the contamination really from a meteorite, or was there something more sinister at play? Theories about alien bacteria or government experiments gone wrong swirled in his head. He knew he needed answers, but the only thing he could do was wait. The day dragged on, each news update more grim than the last. Reports of new cases flooded in, and the symptoms grew more bizarre and terrifying. The authorities seemed as clueless as the public, their attempts at reassurance falling flat. As night fell, Vadim found himself constantly checking his phone, hoping for news about Slava. His own symptoms, the headache, a faint itching on his arms, seemed to worsen with every update he watched. He couldn't help but wonder if he too was falling victim to whatever had befallen his friend. Sleep was out of the question. Vadim sat in the darkened room, the glow of the TV the only source of light. He felt the weight of the unknown pressing down on him, each minute a reminder of how fragile their world had become. The Ministry of Emergency Situations, MEKES, issued an urgent warning: avoid all contact with tap water. This announcement sent a chill down Vadim's spine. If the contamination could affect people through ingestion, what if it could also be absorbed through the skin? The fear gnawed at him, making every drop of water seem like a potential threat. Vadim tried to distract himself. He played games, browsed social media, anything to keep his mind off the crisis. But as evening fell, the anxiety crept back in. The news continued to report new, more disturbing symptoms: muscle spasms, uncontrollable shaking, even violent outbursts. The next news update shattered any hope of a swift resolution. Patients from local hospitals, those who had been suffering from the mysterious illness, had started fleeing the medical facilities. The infection was spreading beyond control. Vadim's pulse quickened as he watched footage of the chaos hospital staff struggling to contain the frantic patients, some of whom exhibited grotesque blisters and erratic behavior. Looking out his window, Vadim's worst fears seemed to materialize. He saw a man stumbling down the street, his body covered in angry, red welts. The man's eyes were wild, his movements jerky and uncoordinated. Vadim's breath caught in his throat. He backed away from the window, his heart pounding. Determined to escape the madness, Vadim decided to take his car and drive far away from the city. He grabbed his keys, threw on a jacket, and hurried out the door. As he reached his car, he noticed a small group of people standing motionless on the sidewalk, their heads twitching in unsettling, unnatural ways. Vadim got into his car and locked the doors, the engine's roar a comforting sound in the eerie silence. As he pulled away, he saw something that made his blood run cold. An infected man lunged at a young woman walking alone, dragging her to the ground. Her screams pierced the night, a sound that would haunt Vadim long after. His hands shook as he gripped the steering wheel, driving as fast as he could without crashing. The streets were filled with scenes of horror: people running from infected individuals, others barricading themselves inside their homes. The city he had known all his life was descending into madness. At a red light, Vadim's car was suddenly surrounded by a group of the infected. They banged on his windows, their eyes filled with a desperate, animalistic hunger. He floored the gas pedal, the car lurching forward, scattering the infected in his path. His heart raced, the adrenaline making his hands tremble. He drove for hours, the city's lights fading behind him as he ventured into the countryside. He needed to find somewhere safe, somewhere untouched by the chaos. But the fear followed him, a relentless reminder that safety was a fleeting illusion in this new, terrifying reality. Vadim continued to navigate the chaotic streets, his eyes darting nervously between the road and his surroundings. He had managed to avoid direct confrontations with the infected so far, but the sense of imminent danger was palpable. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat, every corner potentially bringing him face to face with madness. As he turned onto a main boulevard, he saw a military truck packed with people: men, women, and children crammed together, their faces masks of fear and desperation. The sight confirmed his worst suspicions: the crisis had escalated to a full-scale evacuation. The army was involved, and the city was losing control. Vadim's heart sank as he drove past scenes of destruction and chaos. The infected were everywhere, stumbling through the streets, attacking anyone unfortunate enough to cross their path. Fires burned unchecked, and the air was thick with smoke and the sounds of panic. It was clear that the object that had fallen, the mysterious Tyoster, had unleashed something far more dangerous than a simple meteorite. He turned on the car radio, hoping for guidance or news of safe zones, but the broadcasts were filled with desperate pleas for calm and instructions that sounded increasingly futile. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut: the entire city was a battleground, and no one was safe. Determined to escape before the city was completely locked down, Vadim headed toward the outskirts. The roads were clogged with cars, everyone with the same idea of fleeing the nightmare that their home had become. He weaved through the traffic, his anxiety growing with each passing minute. As he approached the highway out of town, a figure suddenly appeared in his headlights. He slammed on the brakes, the car screeching to a halt just inches from a young woman. She stood in the middle of the road, her eyes wide with terror, but devoid of the madness that marked the infected. "Please, help me," she cried, her voice trembling. "I need to get out of here." Vadim hesitated, his mind racing. She didn't appear infected, but could he take that risk? The human instinct to help battled with his fear of contamination. After a moment of agonizing indecision, he unlocked the door. "Get in, quickly," he urged. The woman scrambled into the passenger seat, and Vadim accelerated, merging back into the flow of fleeing vehicles. For a few minutes, the car was silent, except for the woman's ragged breathing. "Thank you," she said finally, her voice still shaking. "I was so scared." "What's your name?" Vadim asked, trying to keep his voice calm. "Anna," she replied. "I was separated from my family. They didn't make it." Vadim felt a pang of sympathy, but it was quickly overshadowed by a renewed sense of paranoia. What if she was carrying the infection without showing symptoms yet? He glanced at her, noting her pallor and the faint sheen of sweat on her forehead. As the fear gnawed at him, his thoughts grew darker. He couldn't afford to let his guard down. The survival instinct overpowered his compassion. Without warning, he pulled over to the side of the road, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. "You need to get out," he said, his voice cold and unyielding. Anna looked at him in disbelief. "What? Why?" "I can't take the risk," Vadim replied, his heart pounding. "You might be infected. I'm sorry." Tears welled up in her eyes as she pleaded with him. "Please, don't leave me out here. I swear I'm not sick." But Vadim's fear was too strong. He opened the passenger door and gestured for her to leave. When she didn't move, he leaned over and pushed her out, his actions rough and desperate. Anna stumbled onto the roadside, tears streaming down her face. "I'm sorry," he muttered, more to himself than to her, as he slammed the door and sped off. As he drove away, the guilt and fear intertwined, creating a knot in his stomach. He kept glancing in the rearview mirror, watching Anna's figure grow smaller and smaller and smaller until it disappeared altogether. He had saved himself, but at what cost? The road ahead was uncertain, fraught with dangers both seen and unseen. Vadim gripped the wheel tighter, knowing that the worst was likely yet to come. Vadim's paranoia had transformed into something more dangerous. His hands shook on the wheel, his breath coming in ragged gasps as he processed the encounter with Anna. His mind raced with thoughts of infection and survival. He couldn't afford to take chances, and this fear had pushed him over the edge. When Anna had begged for help, he had felt a pang of guilt, but it was quickly smothered by his overwhelming need to stay safe. His actions had been rough, yanking her out of the car and even catching her with the edge of the bumper as he sped away. Her scream echoed in his ears, but he forced himself to ignore it, focusing instead on putting as much distance between himself and the city as possible. As the adrenaline began to wear off, Vadim's attention was drawn to a faint pink line on his wrist. He rubbed at it furiously, hoping it was just a trick of the light or a minor scratch. But the line didn't fade, if anything. It seemed more prominent against his pale skin. Panic surged through him again. What if he was already infected? He tried to reassure himself. It could be nothing, a mere rash from stress or an irritation from something he'd touched. But the seed of doubt was planted. His mind raced back to the news reports, the images of infected patients with rashes and blisters. What if he was already a carrier? The implications were terrifying. If he was infected, every mile he traveled, every person he encountered, could contribute to spreading the disease. He could be responsible for taking the infection beyond the city limits, into neighboring towns and cities. He imagined the horror of entire regions falling to the epidemic, all because of him. Vadim gripped the steering wheel tighter, his knuckles white. He considered his options. Turning back was unthinkable, the city was a nightmare. But going forward meant risking the spread of the infection. He was caught in a trap, with no clear way out. As he drove through the darkening countryside, The roads became emptier, the silence oppressive. His thoughts churned, a relentless loop of fear and guilt. Every itch, every twinge of discomfort made him glance at his wrist, the pink line a constant reminder of his possible fate. He passed through small villages, their streets deserted. The few people he saw moved quickly, their faces filled with the same fear he felt. He avoided them, keeping his windows up and his car doors locked. The isolation was maddening, but he couldn't risk contact. Night fell, and with it came the darkness of his thoughts. What if he was beyond saving? What if his attempt to escape was futile? The idea of being a walking vector for the disease gnawed at him, eating away at his sanity. He pulled over to the side of the road, his hands trembling uncontrollably. He stared at his reflection in the rearview mirror, his eyes wide and bloodshot. He was losing it, the fear consuming him. He needed to find a way to test himself, to know for sure if he was infected. But how? The resources were back in the city, where he couldn't return. Vadim took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. He had to keep moving, had to find somewhere safe. The thought of spreading the infection further was horrifying, but staying still was equally dangerous. The balance between survival and responsibility was precarious, and he was walking a razor's edge. As he started the car again, the engine's hum was a hollow comfort. The journey ahead was uncertain, fraught with unseen dangers. But he had no choice. He had to keep moving, to outrun the shadows of fear and infection that followed him. With the road stretching out before him, Vadim drove into the night, haunted by the knowledge that he might be a harbinger of the very disaster he was trying to escape. Valery Sinitsyn was found guilty under Article 185 of the Criminal Code of Ukraine for the clandestine theft of another's property and sentenced to 6 years in prison without the possibility of early release. This marked the beginning of his harrowing and unjust ordeal. Since 2005, Valery had completely distanced himself from criminal activities, leading a peaceful life managing a cafe and planning his wedding with a woman named Oksana. His days were filled with the simple joys of honest work and the anticipation of a future built on love and integrity. In a twist of fate, while walking through a bustling shopping center, Valery unexpectedly ran into an old acquaintance known by the nickname Vora. The surprise encounter brought back a flood of memories, tinged with the shadows of a past he had long since left behind. Vora, with a charismatic yet unsettling presence, struck up a conversation, weaving tales of their former exploits and the thrill of easy money. Vora's proposition seemed innocent at first, a simple job for some extra cash. He spoke of it as a temporary gig, nothing too serious, just a way to earn a bit on the side. The allure of quick money, combined with the old camaraderie, tempted Valery, despite the alarm bells ringing in his mind. He hesitated, torn between his desire to maintain his newfound stability and the nagging suspicion that Vora's offer might drag him back into a world he had fought so hard to escape. As the conversation continued, Vora's demeanor grew more persuasive, his eyes glinting with the promise of easy rewards. Valery could feel the weight of the past pressing down on him, the darkness he had managed to keep at bay threatening to engulf him once more. In that moment, the choice he faced was stark: to resist the pull of his old life or risk everything he had built for the fleeting promise of quick gains. At the designated job site, Vora deviously spiked Valery's drink with a powerful sedative. As Valery drifted into unconsciousness, Vora executed a meticulously planned theft in a neighboring apartment. When authorities arrived, they found Valery in a deep, drug-induced sleep, with incriminating evidence conveniently planted nearby. He was swiftly arrested, unable to comprehend the nightmare unfolding around him. Despite his innocence, Valery was thrust into a grueling legal battle. The court, swayed by the seemingly irrefutable evidence and Vora's cunningly orchestrated deception, found Valery guilty of the crime. His earnest pleas, bolstered by a team of dedicated lawyers and forensic experts, fell on deaf ears. The system, riddled with corruption and bias, seemed determined to crush him. Valery's despair deepened as every attempt to clear his name was thwarted. His connections and financial resources proved futile against the overwhelming tide of injustice. The harsh sentence handed down marked the beginning of an even darker chapter. Thrust into a brutal prison environment, Valery faced daily horrors that stripped away his remaining hope and dignity. The days in prison blurred into a relentless struggle for survival. The oppressive environment, teeming with violence and cruelty, became a constant test of his resilience. Valerie's thoughts often drifted to Oksana and the life they had planned together, now shattered by betrayal and injustice. Each passing day in the grim confines of his cell was a reminder of the fragile line between freedom and captivity and the devastating cost of misplaced trust. In the face of overwhelming adversity, Valerie clung to a flicker of hope that one day the truth would emerge and he would reclaim his stolen life. But for now, he was ensnared in a relentless nightmare, his spirit tested by the ceaseless trials of his wrongful imprisonment. Following his conviction and transfer to prison, Valerie found himself engulfed in a world of mystifying and horrifying events. These occurrences transformed his already bleak existence into a relentless nightmare, blurring the lines between reality and the supernatural. Valerie was assigned to a cell with two other inmates, Seva and Denis. From the outset, it was clear that prison life bore no resemblance to the dramatized depictions seen in movies. There was no romanticized rebellion or unchecked lawlessness. Instead, the atmosphere was one of tense normalcy, where survival hinged on maintaining a low profile and navigating the complex social hierarchy. In the dim light of their cell, Valerie listened as his cellmates recounted chilling tales and legends that had become part of the prison's lore. One story, in particular, sent shivers down his spine. Seva, his voice a hushed whisper, spoke of a young inmate who had been brutally beaten to death under mysterious circumstances. It was said that the guards turned a blind eye, and no one was ever held accountable for the heinous act. According to the legend, the young man's spirit was unable to rest. Prisoners claimed to have seen his ghost wandering the dimly lit corridors at night, a silent specter of vengeance and sorrow. They described how he appeared in the dead of night, his face contorted in a mask of pain and rage. Some said they had heard his whispers, faint but clear, pleading for justice or warning of impending doom. Denis, adding to the tale, recounted how the temperature would suddenly drop in certain areas of the prison, a sure sign that the restless spirit was near. Lights would flicker, and an eerie silence would fall, as if the very walls of the prison were holding their breath. The guards dismissed these stories as mere superstitions, but the inmates knew better. They had felt the icy chill, seen the shadows moving against the walls, and heard the inexplicable sounds that filled the night. Valerie, initially skeptical, couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The oppressive atmosphere, combined with the relentless tales of supernatural occurrences, began to erode his sense of reality. Each night, as the prison settled into an uneasy quiet, he found himself straining to hear the faintest sound, dreading the moment when he might encounter the vengeful spirit himself. The legend of the young inmate's ghost became a grim backdrop to Valerie's daily existence, a constant reminder of the unseen horrors lurking within the prison walls. The once clear distinction between the living and the dead seemed to blur, leaving Valerie to navigate a world where the past and present collided in terrifying and unpredictable ways. Seva spoke in hushed tones about the underground morgue located beneath the prison, a place where hundreds of fallen inmates lay forgotten. Whispers circulated about strange sounds emanating from its depths, eerie metallic clanks that reverberated through the prison walls at night. The mere mention of the morgue sent chills down Valerie's spine, adding another layer of dread to his already nightmarish existence. 3.5 months into his incarceration, Valerie began to experience unexplainable and terrifying events. His lawyers had failed to prove his innocence, and the prospect of freedom seemed to vanish like a distant mirage. Shadows moved on their own, and whispers that seemed to come from nowhere filled the air. The once familiar environment of his cell transformed into a place of unending terror. Valerie's sleep was plagued by nightmares, blending memories of the trial with horrific visions of the dead. The oppressive atmosphere gnawed at his sanity, making each day a struggle to maintain a grip on reality. The stories of the ghostly inmate and the haunted morgue seemed less like legends and more like imminent threats. One evening, as Valerie collected his meager meal from the canteen worker, known colloquially as the Ballander, he was approached with a shocking revelation. The Ballander, a man with a weathered face and eyes that seemed to pierce through Valerie's soul, leaned in close. In a low, conspiratorial whisper, he revealed that Valerie had been set up. The Ballander offered him two options: attempt an escape through the underground morgue or work there for a month as a night guard, after which he would be quietly released. The prospect of escape was tempting, but the thought of navigating the haunted morgue filled Valerie with dread. The second option, though equally terrifying, held the promise of eventual freedom. The Ballander's words lingered in Valerie's mind as he returned to his cell, the weight of the decision pressing heavily on him. Seva and Denis listened intently as Valerie recounted the Ballander's offer. They exchanged wary glances, understanding the gravity of the situation. Seva, with a grave expression, warned Valerie of the dangers lurking in the morgue, recounting tales of those who had ventured there never to return. Denis, however, saw the opportunity as a slim but real chance at freedom, urging Valerie to consider the second option. Haunted by the relentless horrors of prison life and the ghostly legends that seemed all too real, Valerie knew he had to make a choice. The corridors of the underground morgue beckoned with their dark secrets, and the promise of freedom dangled like a precarious lifeline. As the prison settled into its nightly stillness, Valerie lay awake, contemplating the perilous path that lay before him. Would he brave the haunted depths in search of freedom, or succumb to the terrors that threatened to consume him? The Ballander explained his motivation for helping Valerie stemmed from a deep sense of justice and at the behest of senior figures who believed Valerie didn't belong in prison. His words carried a weight of authority, suggesting an unseen network of influence within the prison's hierarchy. Valerie was granted precious time to ponder the Ballander's proposition. Alone in his cell, he wrestled with the daunting decision before him. Each option seemed fraught with peril, yet both offered a glimmer of hope amidst the darkness that engulfed him. He paced the confines of his cell, his mind racing through the pros and cons, weighing freedom against the specter of the haunted morgue. Denis and Seva, sensing Valerie's internal struggle, demanded honesty from their cellmate. Their eyes bore into him with a mixture of concern and suspicion, warning of dire consequences should he betray their trust. Valerie, feeling the weight of their expectations and fearing the potential fallout, made a silent resolve not to disclose the offer of escape through the morgue. He understood the fragility of their bond in this harsh environment, where betrayal could lead to swift and unforgiving reprisal. The night stretched on, punctuated by the distant echoes of guards' footsteps and the occasional murmurs of restless inmates. In the solitude of his cell, Valerie grappled with the magnitude of his decision. The prison walls seemed to close in around him, amplifying the stakes of his choice. Should he gamble on the uncertain path of escape, risking encounters with the paranormal and unknown? Or should he choose the path of cautious optimism, enduring the grueling task of guarding the morgue in exchange for a chance at redemption? As dawn approached, casting a faint glow through the barred window, Valerie knew that his choice would shape not only his fate, but also the fragile balance of trust and survival within the prison walls. The shadows of doubt and fear loomed large, but somewhere amidst the darkness, a glimmer of hope flickered, a beacon guiding him towards an uncertain future where freedom, though elusive, remained within reach. Valerie receives a delivery with a note detailing a precise escape plan. The instructions are explicit: create a disturbance during meal distribution to be sent to isolation. Following the instructions from the note, Valerie meticulously executes the plan. As trays of food crash to the floor and chaos erupts around him, he plays his part in the orchestrated scene. The commotion draws the attention of guards who swiftly intervene, their authoritative voices cutting through the tumult. Within moments, Valerie finds himself surrounded by guards, their expressions a mix of sternness and suspicion. They quickly escort him away, adhering to protocol by isolating him from the general population. This swift isolation is a crucial element of the plan, designed to create a window of opportunity for his escape. As Valerie is led down the sterile corridors to isolation, the weight of his actions and the looming uncertainty of the future settle heavily upon him. Yet, amidst the adrenaline and fear, there is a spark of determination. This daring move marks the beginning of his bid for freedom, a calculated risk in a prison where every decision carries profound consequences. Alone in the stark confines of isolation, Valerie paces the small cell, his mind racing with thoughts of what lies ahead. The plan, now set in motion, leaves no room for hesitation or doubt. Every heartbeat echoes with the urgency of seizing the fleeting chance to break free from the suffocating grip of injustice and confinement. In the eerie silence of isolation, Valerie's resolve hardens. He knows that the road to freedom will demand more than cunning and courage. It will require unwavering determination to navigate the treacherous terrain of escape. As he waits for the next phase of the plan to unfold, Valerie clings to hope, the fragile thread that binds his fate to the outcome of his audacious gamble against the prison's formidable barriers. In the stark isolation of his cell, Valerie's solitude is interrupted by the unexpected visit of the Ballander. His arrival brings unexpected praise for Valerie's masterful execution of the staged disturbance. The Ballander, with a seasoned air of authority, presents Valerie with essential tools for navigating the morgue: a flashlight, a thermal imager, and a makeshift weapon for self-defense. Armed with the provided tools and a heart pounding with equal parts apprehension and determination, Valerie embarks on the daunting task of circumnavigating the morgue. The Ballander's instructions echo in his mind, emphasizing the importance of avoiding a specific door and refraining from tampering with sealed cells. Each step he takes feels laden with the weight of unseen dangers lurking in the shadows. The morgue's corridors stretch endlessly before him, their silence broken only by the occasional distant sound of creaking floorboard, a faint whisper of wind through aged vents. Valerie moves cautiously, his senses heightened by the dim glow of the flashlight illuminating his path. The thermal imager reveals sporadic heat signatures, hinting at unseen presences that pulse with an eerie warmth in the cold, lifeless chambers. As Valerie navigates deeper into the labyrinthine depths of the morgue, a sense of isolation and dread intensifies. The air grows heavy with the stench of decay, a reminder of the countless souls who had met their end within these grim confines. Each junction and corridor presents a new challenge, a test of his resolve to follow the Ballander's instructions meticulously. With every turn, Valerie confronts the palpable fear of what lies beyond each sealed door and in the forbidden passages. The temptation to investigate, fueled by curiosity and trepidation, threatens to unravel his carefully laid escape plan. Yet, he steels himself against the allure of the unknown, knowing that each deviation could lead to discovery and jeopardize his chances of freedom. The morgue's oppressive silence amplifies the echoes of Valerie's footsteps, a rhythmic reminder of his precarious journey through the heart of darkness. In this macabre dance between survival and pursuit, he clings to the flickering hope that each painstaking step forward brings him closer to the elusive light at the end of this harrowing ordeal. Valerie's heart pounded as he ventured deeper into the morgue's labyrinthine corridors. The air was thick with an unsettling stillness, broken only by the occasional creak of cell doors and the distant echo of his own footsteps. It was then that he heard a faint, haunting squeak that sent a shiver down his spine. Turning a corner, he froze. One of the cells stood open, its yawning darkness a stark contrast to the ordered rows of sealed compartments. Valerie's mind raced with the realization that the chilling tales of inexplicable events in the morgue might indeed hold truth. As Valerie cautiously pressed forward, the flickering beam of his flashlight revealed shadowy figures moving with eerie fluidity along the corridor. Panic gripped him as he sought refuge in an empty cell, pressing himself against the cold, damp walls. The creatures seemed oblivious to his presence at first, their forms shifting and undulating in the dim light. But then, a faint scraping sound echoed through the air, a chilling indication that they were now aware of his presence. Valerie held his breath, the silence punctuated only by the sound of his racing heartbeat and the distant shuffle of unseen footsteps. Suddenly, the air grew thick with a malevolent presence as Valerie found himself transported back to the confines of the prison. It was here, within the familiar yet alien walls, that he confronted something beyond comprehension. A dark entity loomed before him, its form obscured by the dim glow of the solitary bulb overhead. With a guttural growl, it dragged its jagged claws along the metal door of Valerie's cell, sending a spine-chilling screech reverberating through the cramped space. Panic surged within Valerie as he realized the creature's intent, its clawed fingers probing the thin barrier between them with an unnerving determination. In the suffocating darkness, Valerie's mind raced with fear and disbelief. The encounter defied rational explanation, plunging him into a nightmarish realm where the boundaries between reality and nightmare blurred irreversibly. Each echoing scrape of claws on metal echoed through his consciousness, a haunting reminder of the perilous depths to which he had ventured in pursuit of freedom. As the entity continued its relentless assault, Valerie clung to the fragile thread of hope that had guided him thus far. In the abyss of uncertainty, he grappled with the realization that his escape from the prison's physical confines might be dwarfed by the insidious forces that now sought to ensnare his very soul. In the harrowing depths of his ordeal, Valerie found himself confronting the primal instinct for survival. With a heart pounding in terror, he made the desperate decision to shed his clothes, casting them aside like a sacrificial shroud. Naked and vulnerable, he lay prone before the looming presence of the unearthly creature, his body trembling with a mixture of fear and determination. Every nerve was taut, every breath shallow as he enacted his audacious ruse to feign death, to deceive a creature that seemed to embody the darkest depths of the unknown. Time seemed to stretch into an agonizing eternity as the creature approached with an eerie deliberateness. Valerie's senses heightened to an acute awareness of every sound, every movement in the suffocating silence. He dared not breathe, scarcely blinked, as the creature's claws, sharp and merciless, probed his motionless form. Pain erupted in waves as each strike lashed out, tearing through flesh and bone with a cruelty that defied comprehension. Valerie's teeth clenched against the overwhelming agony, his mind a battleground where terror and resolve clashed in a fierce struggle for dominance. Through gritted teeth and quivering muscles, he fought to maintain the facade of death, even as the excruciating torment threatened to shatter his fragile pretense. Amidst the relentless assault and the torment that threatened to consume him, Valerie's thoughts raced with a singular focused survival. With a clarity born of desperation, he formulated a bold strategy, a gambit to seize a fleeting opportunity amidst the chaos of his captivity. Drawing on reserves of courage and cunning, he orchestrated a calculated disturbance within the confines of the prison, knowing full well the risks and consequences that awaited. The plan, meticulous in its design, aimed not only to divert attention but to navigate the precarious path towards freedom. In the shadowy recesses of his mind, amidst the echoes of pain and the palpable fear that gripped him, Valerie clung to a slender thread of hope. It was a beacon amidst the darkness, a beacon that promised a slim chance to transcend the horrors that haunted him. With every fiber of his being, he steeled himself against the malevolent forces that sought to ensnare him, determined to forge ahead into the unknown, where the boundaries of reality and nightmare blurred with chilling intensity. Armed with nothing but his flashlight and the makeshift weapon, Valerie burst forth from isolation, navigating the labyrinthine corridors of the prison with a single-minded determination. He clambered through the narrow confines of the pipe, the echoes of pursuit and the adrenaline coursing through his veins propelling him forward. Each scrape of metal against skin was a testament to his resolve, a defiance against the darkness that had threatened to engulf him. Emerging from the depths of his harrowing ordeal, Valerie found himself once more in the embrace of normalcy home with Oksana. Her tearful embrace spoke volumes, a mixture of joy and sorrow for the trials he had endured. In her eyes he saw reflected the relief and the pain of his absence, a silent testament to the anguish they had both endured in his absence. As the chapters of his tumultuous journey drew to a close, Valerie stood at the precipice of a new beginning. He reflected on the lessons learned amidst the shadows of his past, resolving to forge a future untainted by the specters that had haunted him. With Oksana by his side, he looked forward with renewed hope, casting off the chains of his former life, including the haunting memories of the mystical prison that had nearly consumed his soul. In the quietude of their shared sanctuary, Valerie contemplated the fragility of fate and the resilience of the human spirit. His journey, marked by peril and redemption, had sculpted him into a man transformed, a survivor who had defied the odds and emerged from the abyss stronger than ever before. With each breath, he embraced the promise of a new dawn, where the specter of darkness would forever remain a distant memory in the tapestry of his newfound life. In the remote village of Nova Fedorovka, a small, forgotten town cloaked in obscurity, looms a grim testament to the 1970s, an abandoned psychiatric hospital that once housed the most severe cases of mental illness. Here, amidst its crumbling walls and overgrown grounds, echoes a harrowing saga of medical experimentation and human suffering. This institution was infamous for its radical treatments, none more so than the barbaric practice of lobotomy. A method as controversial as it was cruel, lobotomy involved the insertion of a sharp needle through the eye socket to pierce the skull, aimed at severing neural connections in the brain. Patients deemed beyond hope were subjected to this drastic measure, often with devastating consequences, leaving them in a vegetative state or with irreversible damage to their cognitive and emotional faculties. These grim accounts were not mere tales of distant history, but vivid recollections etched into Valeria's memory by his grandmother since childhood. Her stories painted a chilling picture of the hospital's dark past, where suffering and experimentation intertwined in a macabre dance. Despite its closure in the 1980s, the hospital's forsaken halls have stood untouched for over 3 decades, a somber monument on the town's outskirts. While time has weathered its facade and nature has begun to reclaim its grounds, the building itself remains eerily preserved. Surveillance cameras and electric fences now guard its decaying corridors, ensuring that the remnants of its medical equipment and furniture remain undisturbed, frozen in a haunting tableau of abandonment. The silence within these walls speaks volumes, each creak and rustle a ghostly reminder of the lives once confined within. It is here that one senses the weight of history, where the shadows of past treatments linger alongside the echoes of those who endured them. The hospital stands as a poignant symbol of a bygone era in psychiatric care, a time when desperation often eclipsed compassion, leaving behind scars that transcend generations and serve as a stark warning of the human cost of unchecked medical ambition. In the heart of Nova Fedorovka, a village veiled in obscurity, stands an eerie relic that defies transformation, an abandoned psychiatric hospital. Once attempts were made to convert it into a modern medical facility, yet every effort met with inexplicable phenomena that drove workers and architects to refuse further involvement. The hospital's history is steeped in chilling tales woven into the fabric of local lore. Residents of the town shunned the decaying structure, haunted by stories of restless spirits and echoing cries that purportedly resonated through its halls at night. Such legends took root from the collective fear bred by generations who dared not approach the forsaken building. Valeria, recalling tales shared by his medical mentor, Plato Vasilievich, vividly remembers the ghastly practices that unfolded within those very walls. The hospital was notorious for its ruthless experiments on patients, methods so cruel they bordered on inhumanity. Lobotomies, electroshock therapy, and other radical treatments were wielded in desperate attempts to cure what medical science at the time deemed incurable. Plato Vasilievich's narratives painted a macabre picture of suffering inflicted under the guise of treatment, each story a testament to the unchecked hubris of medical ambition. The horrors recounted by Valeria's mentor became cautionary tales that echoed through his thoughts, warning of the enduring scars left on both the patients and the souls of those who bore witness. Despite its closure in the 1980s, the hospital's imposing presence continues to loom over the outskirts of Nova Fedorovka. Surrounded by overgrown vegetation and guarded by surveillance cameras and electric fences, it remains a silent sentinel to a bygone era of medical darkness, a stark reminder of the thin line between healing and harm, compassion and cruelty, in the pursuit of understanding the human mind. Even now, the whispers of the past linger, carried on the winds that sweep through its desolate corridors, where the sins of the past intermingle with the haunting specters of lives lost and broken. The abandoned hospital stands as a chilling testament to the depths of human suffering and the enduring mysteries that defy rational explanation, a place where fear and fascination intertwine in the shadowed recesses of the mind. Captivated by the haunting tales that had seeped into his consciousness, Valeria found himself discussing an audacious plan with his friend Max. The idea to explore the abandoned psychiatric hospital that loomed ominously on the outskirts of their hometown, Nova Fedorovka. Max, equally intrigued by the macabre allure of the place, enthusiastically suggested they undertake this adventure to uncover more about its grim history. Despite the lingering apprehension gnawing at him, Valeria eventually acquiesced to Max's proposal. The prospect of delving into the mysteries concealed within the forsaken hospital proved irresistible, fueled by a mixture of curiosity and dread. To prepare for their expedition into the depths of the hospital's forsaken halls, Valeria and Max devised a cunning plan. Drawing on Valeria's connection to his medical mentor, Plato Vasilievich, they hatched a scheme to gain access to crucial blueprints and floor plans of the facility. Through subtle manipulation, they managed to procure a detailed map from Plato Vasilievich, who unwittingly trusted their innocent inquiry. Armed with this clandestinely obtained map, the duo meticulously plotted their course through the labyrinthine corridors and crumbling wards of the hospital. Every detail was scrutinized, every potential hazard anticipated, yet the allure of unraveling its secrets spurred them forward despite their growing unease. As the night of their exploration drew near, Valeria couldn't shake the sense of foreboding that gripped him. The stories of restless spirits and lingering echoes of suffering seemed to echo in the very air around them. Yet, driven by a mixture of fascination and trepidation, they steeled themselves for the journey ahead, a journey that promised to unearth more than they could ever have imagined about the dark legacy of the abandoned psychiatric hospital of Nova Fedorovka. Under the veil of night, Valeria and Max embarked on their clandestine mission into the forsaken grounds of the psychiatric hospital in Nova Fedorovka. Choosing a covert approach, they traversed the rear perimeter fence using a heavy concrete slab strategically placed to bridge the gap, ensuring their entry remained unnoticed. The darkness enveloped them like a shroud, punctuated only by the distant hum of the town and the occasional rustle of foliage stirred by the night breeze. Once inside the compound, they navigated cautiously through the overgrown pathways and crumbling infrastructure, guided by the feeble beams of their flashlights. The air was thick with an oppressive stillness, broken intermittently by the eerie creaking of old doors and the soft shuffle of their own footsteps echoing down deserted corridors. Their exploration led them deeper into the heart of the hospital's dilapidated interior. As they breached a stubbornly resistant window to gain access to a forgotten wing, they were met with a haunting tableau: a stark, clinical room with walls painted a chilling shade of white and a solitary bed draped with sheets stained dark crimson with dried blood. The sight froze them in place, sending a wave of visceral dread through their veins. Valeria and Max exchanged nervous glances, their breath catching in their throats as they grappled with the sheer horror of the scene before them. The implications were unsettling. What untold suffering had transpired within these walls? What tragic events had stained this room with such macabre symbolism? Despite their rising fear, fueled by the palpable aura of malevolence that seemed to linger in the air, they pressed on with their exploration. Room after room revealed more remnants of the hospital's dark past, shelves lined with decaying patient records, forgotten medical equipment coated in layers of dust, and silent hallways that seemed to whisper secrets of the tortured souls who once sought refuge within these confines. As they ventured deeper, Valeria and Max's initial curiosity morphed into a profound sense of unease. Each discovery reinforced the unsettling truth that they were treading on ground fraught with tragic history and lingering despair. The hospital's silent corridors seemed to pulse with a spectral energy, as if the echoes of past suffering reverberated through the very fabric of the building itself. Their nerves on edge, they resolved to press forward, driven by an unspoken pact to uncover more about the hospital's grim legacy. Yet, with each step deeper into the labyrinthine corridors, they couldn't shake the feeling that they were not alone, that unseen eyes watched their every move, and unseen hands beckoned them toward darker truths yet to be unearthed. The night wore on, and as they retraced their steps toward the exit, Valeria couldn't escape the chilling memory of the blood-stained room. Its ghostly presence lingered in their thoughts, a haunting reminder of the darkness that permeated the abandoned hospital of Nova Fedorovka, a place where the line between reality and nightmare blurred, and where the ghosts of the past whispered their tragic tales into the void of the night. As Valeria and Max delved deeper into the forsaken labyrinth of the psychiatric hospital, their nerves were already on edge, heightened by the chilling discoveries and the oppressive silence that enveloped them. The flickering beam of Valeria's flashlight provided a feeble reassurance in the dimly lit corridors, but their uneasy peace shattered abruptly when Valeria realized his phone, their only source of light, was missing. Panic gripped them as the flashlight suddenly sputtered and died, plunging them into a suffocating darkness. In the pitch-black void, Max's nerves frayed, exacerbated by their surroundings, his mind already teetering on the edge of fear, was pushed over the precipice when he found himself entangled in the hospital's old restraints, a macabre relic used by Valeria for a morbid photo. Frantically searching for his lost phone, Valeria stumbled upon it and quickly illuminated their surroundings. However, the relief was short-lived as the feeble light revealed a ghastly sight. What initially appeared to be a decaying body lying inert in the corner of the room turned out to be a terrified Max, paralyzed with fear and barely recognizable in the dim glow. Despite the chilling encounter, Valeria's resolve hardened. Determined to uncover the hospital's darkest secrets, they pressed on, their footsteps echoing through the eerily silent corridors. Their journey led them deeper into the bowels of the hospital, down winding staircases that seemed to descend into the very depths of despair. Their descent culminated in a foreboding basement, where the air was thick with the stale scent of neglect and decay. Here, they confronted a massive metal door, ominous in its silent challenge. With trepidation gnawing at them, Valeria and Max pushed forward, driven by a morbid curiosity that bordered on obsession. Beyond the imposing door lay an eerie chamber of forgotten enclave where unspeakable experiments had once been conducted. Strewn about were archaic medical instruments and shelves stacked with yellowing documents, death certificates, and autopsy reports detailing the tragic outcomes of failed lobotomies. Among them, Valeria's eyes fixated on a name that sent a shiver down his spine: Tikhokorotsev. The room bore witness to the horrors inflicted upon the vulnerable patients, their stories etched in the faded ink of medical records. The walls seemed to reverberate with the silent screams of those who had suffered within these walls, their pain and anguish forever etched into the very fabric of the hospital's haunted existence. Standing amidst the relics of a bygone era, Valeria felt a profound sense of sorrow and anger. The hospital, once a place of supposed healing, had become a mausoleum of broken souls and shattered dreams, a testament to the unchecked cruelty that lurked behind the facade of medical science. With trembling hands, Valeria gathered the damning evidence, knowing that the horrors witnessed here could never be fully comprehended or justified. As they retreated from the basement, the weight of their discoveries hung heavy in the air, a grim reminder of the price paid by those who had crossed the threshold of the abandoned psychiatric hospital of Nova Fedorovka. As Valeria continued his exploration of the basement, the morbid revelations escalated to a nightmarish crescendo. Amongst the forgotten relics and decaying remnants of the hospital's grim past, he stumbled upon a grim tableau that froze him in horror: a pile of human remains, bones scattered amidst the debris like discarded remnants of forgotten lives. The sight seared into his consciousness, unleashing a primal fear that gripped him with an icy hand. Meanwhile, Max, his nerves already frayed to breaking point, clutched desperately at the heavy metal door that separated them from the unknown terrors lurking beyond. His senses, heightened by the oppressive darkness and the weight of their discoveries, played cruel tricks on his mind. Every creak and rustle became magnified, morphing into sinister whispers and phantom footsteps that echoed ominously through the labyrinthine corridors. Valeria's heart pounded in his chest as he strained to hear through the stifling silence, his own mind beginning to betray him with imagined threats. The pressure mounted when Max, still gripping the door in a vice-like grip, suddenly cried out in terror, convinced of approaching malevolent presences. Valeria's own ears seemed to corroborate his friend's delusions, catching fleeting whispers and the distant shuffle of unseen entities. In a panicked rush, Valeria lunged to assist Max, pushing against the heavy door with frantic urgency. The air thickened with dread as the door unexpectedly slammed shut with a finality that reverberated through their bones. In a heart-stopping moment, Max found himself trapped on the other side, his frantic protests drowned out by the unyielding barrier that had sealed him in. Desperation fueled Valeria's efforts as he grappled with the unyielding handle, each futile attempt to open it echoing with the cruel realization of their predicament. The seconds stretched into agonizing minutes, his trembling fingers grappling with the stubborn mechanism until, with a final surge of adrenaline, he managed to wrench it open. Relief flooded both of them as Max stumbled free, his face pale and eyes wide with the residual terror of confinement. They clung to each other, their hearts racing in sync with the tumultuous emotions that threatened to overwhelm them. With trembling steps, they retreated from the accursed basement, haunted by the macabre sights and auditory hallucinations that had besieged them. The hospital's grim secrets, unearthed in the most harrowing of circumstances, now stained their memories with a darkness that would linger long after they escaped the forsaken halls. As they emerged into the cold night air, the weight of their shared ordeal hung heavy upon them, a reminder of the fragility of sanity and the lurking shadows that still prowled within the abandoned psychiatric hospital of Nova Fedorovka. As Valeria navigated through the labyrinthine corridors of the abandoned hospital, his nerves still raw from their harrowing ordeal in the basement, he encountered a terror beyond comprehension. A grotesque creature lurked in the shadows, its form twisted and malevolent. Before he could react, it pounced with unnatural speed, overpowering him with inhuman strength. Its grip was vice-like as it bound Valeria's limbs, rendering him helpless against its sinister intent. With dread certainty, Valeria realized the creature's intentions. It spoke of performing a lobotomy, describing the agonizing procedure with chilling precision. The threat loomed large as Valeria struggled against his restraints, the terror of imminent mutilation driving him to the brink of despair. In the darkest moment, when hope seemed lost, a familiar voice shattered the suffocating silence. Plato Vasilievich, Valeria's mentor and unwitting guardian, materialized from the shadows with a resolve as steely as the scalpel he wielded. In a swift and decisive motion, he intervened, dispatching the monstrous assailant with deadly accuracy. Breathless and trembling, Valeria was liberated from his bonds, his mind reeling from the surreal clash between nightmare and reality. Plato Vasilievich explained that he had been monitoring their exploration, aware of the lurking dangers within the hospital's forsaken walls. His timely intervention had thwarted the creature's macabre designs, sparing Valeria from a fate worse than death. The aftermath was fraught with physical and psychological scars. Valeria was rushed to a nearby hospital, where doctors embarked on a painstaking effort to save his vision, the threat of ocular damage from the creature's assault still looming large. His parents, grappling with the aftermath, negotiated fiercely with medical authorities to ensure Valeria received compassionate care rather than confinement to a psychiatric institution, a battle won through unwavering familial support and the expertise of dedicated psychiatrists. In the ensuing weeks and months, Valeria embarked on a grueling journey of recovery, both physical and emotional. Surrounded by the steadfast love of his family and the compassionate guidance of his psychiatrist, he gradually pieced together the shattered fragments of his psyche. The memories of that nightmarish encounter haunted him, yet through therapy and unwavering determination, he found resilience in the face of unspeakable trauma. The abandoned psychiatric hospital of Nova Fedorovka remained a haunted echo in his mind, a testament to the fragility of sanity and the enduring battle against the darkness within. But through courage and the bonds of love, Valeria emerged stronger, a survivor marked by scars that bore witness to the horrors he had faced and overcome. The aftermath of the ill-fated expedition into the abandoned hospital plunged Valeria into a deep and relentless abyss of despair. Saved from the clutches of a nightmarish entity by the timely intervention of Plato Vasilievich, Valeria's relief was short-lived as the reality of their losses unfolded. Plato, driven by a noble resolve to locate and rescue Max, ventured back into the labyrinthine depths of the hospital's basement, where the darkness concealed unseen horrors. Tragically, his valiant effort ended in his untimely demise, leaving Max's fate shrouded in uncertainty and Valeria shattered by grief. The news of Plato's death and Max's disappearance reverberated through the town of Nova Fedorovka, igniting a groundswell of outrage and demand for accountability. The community's patience worn thin by years of neglect and eerie silence surrounding the hospital, they rallied behind calls for action from local authorities. The once ominous structure, now a symbol of tragedy and neglect, became a focal point of public scrutiny and condemnation. Haunted by remorse and guilt, Valeria bore the weight of responsibility for leading Max into the perilous depths of the abandoned hospital. Each day became a relentless battle against despair, the echoes of that fateful night haunting his every waking moment. He grappled with profound self-blame, tormented by the belief that his actions had directly caused the loss of his dear friend and mentor. As discussions swirled about the hospital's impending demolition, a long overdue response to its grim legacy, Valeria found himself caught between grief and a desperate need for closure. His soul weighed heavy with sorrow for the lives lost, and the irrevocable consequences of their ill-fated exploration. The community's cries for justice only served to deepen his anguish, a constant reminder of the irreversible price paid for their curiosity and courage. In the midst of his anguish, Valerius sought solace in memories of Plato's unwavering kindness and Max's irrepressible spirit. Supported by the steadfast love of his family and the compassionate guidance of his psychiatrist, he embarked on a painful journey of healing, a journey marked by the arduous task of forgiving himself and finding redemption amidst the shadows of loss. The tale of the abandoned psychiatric hospital of Nova Fedorovka remains etched in the annals of the town's history, a cautionary tale of the darkness that lurks within forgotten places and the profound consequences of daring to uncover their secrets. For Valeria, it serves as a haunting reminder of the fragility of life, the enduring bonds of friendship, and the enduring quest for healing in the aftermath of unspeakable tragedy. During a family visit to her hometown, the narrator's sister, Tatiana, reluctantly divulged a chilling tale that unfolded one late summer evening as they leisurely strolled through the neighborhood. The sun was setting, casting a warm golden glow over the newly constructed buildings that lined the streets. Tatiana, typically effervescent and eager to share local gossip, noticeably hesitated when they approached a particular micro-district known for its ambiguous reputation. Despite the aesthetic appeal of the modern architecture and the promise of urban renewal, there was an unspoken tension as Tatiana began to speak. Her voice, usually vibrant and clear, now wavered slightly, as if trying to find the right words to convey the eerie atmosphere that pervaded the area. It wasn't just hearsay or local superstition, there were concrete accounts of strange occurrences that had unsettled the community. Stories circulated of shadowy figures glimpsed in alleyways, inexplicable noises echoing through deserted streets at night, and an overwhelming sense of unease that seemed to cling to the very fabric of the district. One particular incident Tatiana recounted involved a close friend who had a harrowing experience while walking home alone after a late-night gathering. The friend spoke of feeling an inexplicable presence behind her, of whispers that seemed to emanate from the darkness itself, and a sudden gust of cold wind that chilled her to the bone. It was an encounter that left her friend shaken and forever wary of venturing into that part of town after dark. As Tatiana spoke, the ambient sounds of the neighborhood, distant laughter, the hum of traffic in the background, the occasional bark of a dog seemed to fade into the background, emphasizing the gravity of her words. Even their mother, who had accompanied them on this visit to their hometown, couldn't dispel the uneasy feeling that settled over their conversation. Despite the curiosity that piqued within the narrator's mind, Tatiana remained steadfast in her resolve to avoid the micro-district after sunset. Her reluctance was palpable, a testament to the lingering fear that clung to the neighborhood like a shroud. It served as a stark reminder that behind the facade of progress and modernity, there often lay darker truths, places where the veil between the known and the unknown was thin, and where cautionary tales whispered their warnings to those willing to listen. As they continued their leisurely walk through the familiar streets of their hometown, the glow of streetlights casting long shadows across the pavement, Tatiana's story lingered in the air, like an unanswered question. It was a narrative that spoke of the complexities of urban life, where the allure of new beginnings could sometimes mask deeper mysteries and unspoken fears. And amidst the comfort of family and the familiarity of home, there existed corners where the past intertwined with the present, weaving a tapestry of stories that resonated with both wonder and apprehension. During a family visit to her hometown, the narrator's sister, Tatiana, reluctantly disclosed a disturbing reason for avoiding a particular micro-district. As they walked through the neighborhood one evening, Tatiana's unease grew palpable as they neared the area's outskirts. It was then that she revealed the chilling truth: the micro-district had been erected upon what was once a cemetery, used relatively recently in the latter half of the 20th century. Tatiana explained, with a mix of disbelief and horror, that despite regulations prohibiting construction on cemetery grounds, the district had sprung up rapidly due to rampant corruption and the connections of local officials. These officials, driven by greed and impunity, not only allowed but facilitated the construction, some even securing homes for themselves within the newly built structures. It was a grim testament to the lengths to which corruption could warp even the sanctity of burial grounds. The narrative took on a darker hue as Tatiana recounted whispers among locals about disturbances in the area, strange noises at night, sightings of shadowy figures where gravestones once stood, and an overall feeling of dread that permeated the district. Residents spoke in hushed tones of inexplicable events that defied rational explanation, fueling superstitions and cautionary tales that spread like wildfire through the community. Their mother, who had accompanied them on this visit, listened with a mix of concern and disbelief, her usually warm demeanor clouded by the unsettling revelation. Even in the midst of their family gathering, the weight of Tatiana's story hung heavy in the air, casting a pall over their otherwise joyful reunion. As they continued their walk through the neighborhood, the once familiar streets took on a different aspect, tinged with an unsettling aura. The glow of streetlights seemed to falter slightly, casting deeper shadows that seemed to conceal more than they revealed. Tatiana's reluctance to venture further into the micro-district after dusk was understandable, her cautionary tale a stark reminder of the consequences of unchecked greed and moral decay. The experience left a lasting impression on the narrator, a reminder that beneath the veneer of progress and modernity, there could lie buried secrets and unresolved spirits, haunting the present with reminders of a troubled past. It served as a cautionary tale not just of urban development gone awry, but of the moral compromises that could lead to disturbances that defied explanation, lingering in the collective consciousness of those who dared to listen. On a sweltering summer day, a child playing in the sandbox made a chilling discovery: an ancient gravestone buried beneath the sand. The child's innocent curiosity turned to unease as they brushed away the grains to reveal the weathered inscription, which sent a shiver down their spine. Nearby, the child's mother, sensing something amiss, but not wanting to alarm her young one, quietly observed with a growing sense of dread. She said nothing and decided to bury the unsettling find back in the earth, hoping to shield her child from the unsettling truth lurking beneath the playground's surface. The incident weighed heavily on her mind as the days passed. However, her worst fears were realized when, just a day after the discovery, the child vanished without a trace. Panic gripped the neighborhood as news spread of the disappearance, and soon, reports emerged of other children going missing from the same area. Rumors swirled among terrified residents, fueled by the eerie coincidence of the gravestone's unearthing and the subsequent disappearances. Authorities launched a frantic search, scouring every corner of the neighborhood and beyond, but the children seemed to have vanished into thin air. The once vibrant community now stood gripped by fear and suspicion, with parents keeping their children close and doors locked tight at night. As the investigation unfolded, whispers of a malevolent presence haunting the area grew louder. Some speculated that disturbing the resting place, marked by the gravestone, had awakened something sinister, an ancient force that hungered for innocence. Others pointed fingers at darker possibilities: human predators lurking in the shadows, exploiting the neighborhood's sense of unease for their own nefarious ends. Despite efforts to reassure the community, the sense of unease persisted, casting a pall over the once peaceful neighborhood. The playground, once a gathering place for laughter and play, now stood deserted, its swings swaying silently in the breeze, a haunting reminder of the innocence lost and the mysteries that lingered unresolved. The disappearance of the children remained a grim chapter in the town's history, a cautionary tale that echoed through the years, reminding residents of the fragility of safety and the depths of darkness that could lie hidden beneath even the most familiar streets and playgrounds. Amidst the haunting backdrop of disappearances and unsettling returns, the once serene neighborhood near the Volga River descended into a state of collective dread. Some of the missing children were discovered days later, found wandering aimlessly in the nearby forest or along the riverbank. Their silent, somber demeanor sent chills through the community. These children, once vibrant and carefree, now returned with a haunted expression, refusing to speak of their ordeal. Their eerie silence only deepened the sense of unease among the residents. Parents struggled to understand what had befallen their children during those mysterious absences. Rumors swirled, theories abounded, but no concrete answers emerged. The children's reticence fueled speculation of supernatural influences or worse, sinister forces at play. As fear gripped the neighborhood, panic set in. Families, desperate to protect their loved ones, began to abandon their homes and fled the area in droves. The exodus was particularly swift among families of local officials, whose sudden departure raised suspicions among those left behind. Accusations of complicity or knowledge about the disappearances spread like wildfire, further fracturing the community's fragile sense of trust and security. Authorities scrambled to maintain order and reassure the remaining residents, but the atmosphere of fear and suspicion lingered. The playgrounds that once echoed with laughter now stood desolate, a stark reminder of the innocence lost and the shadow cast over the neighborhood. Those who remained lived in a state of perpetual vigilance, haunted by the specter of unknown dangers lurking just beyond their doorsteps. The return of some children, though a relief in one sense, only served to deepen the mystery and intensify the community's collective trauma. The neighborhood, once a close-knit enclave, now bore the scars of a dark chapter that defied explanation, a cautionary tale of how swiftly safety and normalcy could unravel in the face of inexplicable events. Years later, whispers still echoed through the streets, recounting the harrowing events that had unfolded. The children who had returned remained silent witnesses, their eyes holding secrets that would forever haunt those who dared to remember the summer of disappearances near the Volga. In various corners of the city, the nightmare unfolded, with relentless cruelty, a series of grisly discoveries that shattered the peace and plunged the community into abject terror. Bodies of missing children were unearthed in macabre locations, some found in sewer manholes, others in the dark recesses of basements, garages, or hidden cellars. Each discovery sent shockwaves through the neighborhood, leaving residents gripped by fear and disbelief. The police, overwhelmed by the escalating horror, launched extensive investigations and arrested scores of suspects in desperate attempts to halt the relentless wave of disappearances. Yet, despite their efforts, the hunt for the elusive perpetrator proved futile. The community's trust in law enforcement waned as each arrest failed to bring an end to the nightmare that continued to unfold. Psychologists, brought in to aid in the investigations, faced an insurmountable challenge. Surviving children who returned from their harrowing ordeals remained traumatized and mute, their young minds unable or unwilling to divulge any useful information about the perpetrator. Their silence added to the frustration and hopelessness that pervaded the community, leaving crucial questions unanswered and fueling rampant speculation. As the terror persisted, families barricaded themselves behind locked doors, afraid to venture out after dark, and the once vibrant streets fell eerily silent. The playgrounds, once filled with laughter and innocence, now stood deserted, their swings swaying mournfully in the wind, a stark testament to the horrors that had unfolded. Years passed, and the wounds inflicted upon the neighborhood remained raw. The memory of the lost children haunted the collective consciousness, a grim reminder of the vulnerability that lurked beneath the surface of everyday life. The city's scars ran deep, etched by a chapter of darkness that defied comprehension, a cautionary tale of how swiftly safety could be shattered, leaving behind only unanswered questions and lingering fear. In the tranquil suburb where she had spent decades tending to her garden, an elderly woman's peaceful routine was shattered by a horrific discovery. While gardening one afternoon, she accidentally unearthed a human skull buried beneath the soil. Shocked and unnerved by the grim find, she succumbed to a sudden, inexplicable demise not long after. Her lifeless body was later discovered in her bed, gruesomely decapitated, an act of unspeakable violence that sent shockwaves through the entire community. The news of the elderly woman's brutal murder spread like wildfire, intensifying the prevailing atmosphere of fear and dread that had already gripped the neighborhood. Residents, already reeling from a string of terrifying events and unexplained deaths, were now faced with the chilling reality of a killer among them. Panic spread rapidly, and families, fearing for their safety, began hastily abandoning their homes in a desperate bid to escape the encroaching darkness. The once bustling streets grew eerily silent as houses emptied and windows were boarded up. Playground swings creaked mournfully in the wind, a stark contrast to the laughter that had once echoed through the neighborhood. Those who remained lived in constant fear, barricading themselves indoors, afraid to venture out even during daylight hours. Law enforcement efforts to apprehend the perpetrator proved futile, with each passing day bringing new reports of unsettling occurrences and inexplicable tragedies. The community, fractured and traumatized, struggled to make sense of the escalating horror that had befallen them. Years later, the neighborhood stood as a haunting reminder of the fragility of peace and the depths of human depravity. The empty houses and overgrown gardens bore witness to the exodus prompted by fear, a testament to the devastating impact of unchecked violence and the irreparable scars left upon a once thriving community. The legacy of terror lingered, etched into the collective memory of those who had lived through the nightmare, forever changed by the harrowing events that had unfolded in their midst. The construction of the church in the troubled neighborhood marked a turning point amidst the unsettling events that had plagued the community for so long. Funds for the church were raised by the residents themselves, with notable anonymous donations suggesting a collective effort to cleanse their troubled surroundings. Speculations arose that some donors sought redemption, perhaps feeling guilt for past transgressions. Following the completion of the church, a profound shift occurred. The mysterious occurrences that had terrorized the neighborhood abruptly ceased, leaving an eerie calm in their wake. Residents, though relieved by the newfound peace, remained wary and contemplative, unsure of the forces that had been at play and the role their collective faith had played in dispelling them. Amidst these reflections, the narrator recalled a haunting dream featuring their great-grandmother, who appeared to urge them away from danger. In the dream, her presence evoked a sense of urgency and warning, leaving the narrator with a lingering unease. According to local superstitions, dreams where deceased loved ones beckoned were considered ominous, a harbinger of impending danger or misfortune. However, upon deeper reflection, the narrator found a glimmer of solace in the dream. The thought that their great-grandmother may have been protecting them from unseen threats provided a measure of comfort amidst the lingering fear. It suggested a guardian presence from beyond, watching over them in times of peril, a reassuring notion in the face of the neighborhood's troubled history. As life gradually returned to normalcy in the wake of the church's completion, the memory of those unsettling times persisted, woven into the fabric of local folklore and cautionary tales. The neighborhood, once gripped by fear and uncertainty, now bore the imprint of a community united by faith and the belief in supernatural intervention, a testament to the enduring power of belief and the resilience of the human spirit in the face of darkness. In the heart of the bustling city, she founded a quaint apartment that seemed to beckon her with its charm. Eager to settle into her own space, she signed the papers without hesitation, unaware of the lingering presence that awaited her. The first nights were serene, filled with the quiet hum of city life filtering through the windows. Yet, as she began to settle into her new home, whispers of something inexplicable started to surface. It started with faint cries echoing through the walls, soft sobbing that she initially attributed to the sounds of an urban neighborhood. But the cries persisted, growing louder and more haunting with each passing night. Unease settled upon her as she questioned her sanity. There were no children living adjacent, no logical source for the mournful sounds that pierced the late hours. Driven by curiosity and a growing sense of unease, she sought answers from her neighbors, hoping to uncover any clue that might explain the spectral sounds. Reluctantly, they shared the tragic tale of the previous occupant, a young woman with an infant son. Their arrival was marked by joy and promise, but their time in the apartment was cut short by a sudden and inexplicable tragedy. Details emerged slowly, woven with threads of grief and disbelief. The young mother, once full of hope, had met a tragic end under circumstances clouded in mystery. The neighbors spoke in hushed tones of eerie occurrences witnessed in the wake of her passing, doors that opened on their own, lights flickering inexplicably, and the sound of a baby's cries echoing through the corridors at night. As she pieced together the fragments of this chilling narrative, the haunting cries she had dismissed as figments of imagination took on a chilling reality. She felt the weight of a presence that lingered, tethered to the apartment by unfinished business or unfulfilled promises. Each night became a journey into the unknown, where the boundary between the living and the departed blurred. She found herself listening intently to the cries, straining to decipher their origin and meaning. Was it the echo of a grieving mother's anguish, forever imprinted upon the walls of her once happy home? Haunted by the tragic tale and the inexplicable events that unfolded, she wrestled with a sense of responsibility. Could she find a way to ease the restless spirits that seemed trapped within the confines of the apartment? Or was she destined to share their silent lament, forever entwined in a spectral dance between past and present? The apartment, once a symbol of newfound independence and possibility, now held secrets that defied logic and reason. As she navigated through the shadows of uncertainty, she realized that some stories never truly end, they linger, whispering their secrets to those willing to listen, forever haunting the corridors of memory and imagination. Upon hearing desperate whispers of a solution, the protagonist's friend, sensing her growing distress, directed her towards a mysterious figure known only as the Reaper. Cloaked in shadows and shrouded in an aura of ancient knowledge, the Reaper was rumored to possess the ability to resolve the most inexplicable and eerie disturbances. Reluctantly, yet driven by a gnawing curiosity and the relentless cries that echoed through her nights, she sought out the Reaper. Their meeting was arranged in the darkest corners of the city, away from prying eyes in the mundane world. In the heart of a desolate cemetery, where moonlight struggled to pierce the heavy canopy of trees, she encountered the Reaper. His presence was unsettling yet strangely comforting, as if he carried with him the weight of centuries-old wisdom and the burden of countless souls he had guided. In a voice that seemed to echo from beyond, the Reaper spoke of the ritual that could potentially sever the spectral ties that bound her apartment to its tragic past. His terms were cryptic yet unwavering. She must assist his vassals, beings whose existence straddled the realms of the living and the dead. As the Reaper outlined the details of the ritual, a chill crept down her spine. It involved offerings of blood and whispered invocations to forces unseen. Each word he spoke resonated with a solemnity that made her question the boundaries of belief and sanity. He warned of consequences, of the delicate balance between appeasing restless spirits and awakening darker entities that lurked in the shadows of the unseen world. The Reaper's gaze bore into her soul, measuring her resolve and her willingness to tread where mortal minds feared to wander. Yet, despite the unease that gripped her heart, she found herself nodding in reluctant agreement. The cries of the unseen child, the inexplicable events that plagued her nights, they demanded resolution, even if it meant delving into the realm of the unknown and confronting the specters of her darkest fears. With a solemn nod, the Reaper accepted her hesitant consent. Shadows seemed to lengthen around them as they finalized their pact, sealing her fate to a path where the boundary between reality and nightmare blurred into an indistinct haze. As she departed the cemetery that night, the weight of her decision settled upon her shoulders like a cloak of shadows. The Reaper's words echoed in her mind, mingling with the cries that haunted her dreams. She knew that her journey had only just begun, into a realm where the living and the dead converged in a dance of whispered secrets and spectral echoes. Following the unsettling ritual orchestrated by the Reaper, the once echoing cries of an unseen child ceased to disturb the silence of her nights. The apartment, once a nexus of inexplicable phenomena, now bore an eerie calmness that whispered of a peace reclaimed from the clutches of spectral unrest. Yet the Reaper did not depart as abruptly as the spirits had vanished. Instead, he lingered in the shadows of her home, a silent sentinel amidst the mundane trappings of everyday life. His presence, though disquieting, brought with it a sense of assurance, a tether to the unseen forces that now lay dormant, held at bay by the enigmatic rites he had performed. With tentative resolve born of necessity, the heroine acquiesced to the Reaper's conditions. Trust, a fragile currency in the realm where reality blurred with the spectral, was extended to the Reaper and his unconventional methods. She found herself navigating a precarious alliance, where the boundaries of mortal logic bent under the weight of arcane knowledge and spectral obligations. Their collaboration unfolded in whispers and shadows, a dance of mutual dependence where her understanding of the world expanded to accommodate the Reaper's cryptic instructions. Together they wove a delicate web of offerings and invocations, aimed at placating restless spirits and safeguarding against the resurgence of malevolent forces that lurked at the fringes of perception. Days turned into nights, and nights into restless dreams haunted by half-remembered echoes of the Reaper's warnings. Yet, amidst the uncertainty, a fragile equilibrium emerged, a testament to the heroine's resilience and the Reaper's unwavering commitment to his peculiar craft. In the Reaper's presence, she glimpsed a world beyond the veil of mortality, where the threads of fate intertwined with the whispers of departed souls. His guidance became her anchor in the stormy seas of the supernatural, a beacon of understanding in the murky depths of the unknown. Together, they forged a path fraught with uncertainty and whispered secrets, navigating the shifting landscapes of haunted memories and spectral echoes. Through their uneasy alliance, the heroine discovered a courage she never knew she possessed, a willingness to confront the shadows that danced at the periphery of her perception. And so, in the quiet hours of the night, amidst the flickering candlelight, and the hushed murmurs of arcane incantations, the Reaper remained a steadfast guardian in the shadows, bound by a pact forged in the crucible of spectral unrest and mortal fear. The woman found herself besieged by inexplicable occurrences within her newly acquired apartment, where eerie sounds of an unseen child's cries echoed through the halls, despite the absence of any neighboring infants. Disturbed by these spectral disturbances, she sought solace and resolution from a figure whispered about in hushed tones among her circle, Alexander, known ominously as the Reaper. Intrigued yet apprehensive, she traced the Reaper's elusive trail, navigating through obscure references and cryptic warnings until she stood before him, a figure cloaked in shadows and steeped in arcane knowledge. Alexander, with a demeanor that straddled the line between human and something otherworldly, offered a solution steeped in ritualistic practices. With solemnity and a sense of urgency, the Reaper unraveled the tangled threads of her supernatural affliction. He spoke of a spirit tied to the tragic demise of its mother, lingering in limbo within the confines of her home. His proposal was unconventional yet compelling, a ritual that bridged the realms of the living and the dead, aimed at appeasing the restless spirit and restoring peace to the haunted dwelling. Under the Reaper's guidance, they embarked on a journey through realms unseen and ancient rites forgotten by time. In the dim light of flickering candles and the faint scent of incense, they delved into the depths of spectral unrest, confronting echoes of grief and anguish that reverberated through the apartment's walls. Through the haze of uncertainty and palpable tension, the ritual unfolded like a dance between worlds, where each movement and intonation carried weight beyond mortal comprehension. The woman, guided by a blend of trepidation and determination, lent herself wholly to the Reaper's enigmatic craft, trusting that his mastery over the arcane would bring an end to her torment. And so, as the final incantations echoed into the silence of the night, a profound shift permeated the air. The cries that once pierced the darkness fell silent, replaced by an eerie tranquility that settled like a shroud over the apartment. The Reaper's presence lingered, a silent sentinel amidst the residual energies of their endeavor, ensuring that the delicate balance they had forged would endure. In the aftermath of their collaboration, the woman found herself transformed, no longer haunted by spectral echoes, but imbued with a newfound understanding of the fragile boundary between the living and the dead. She had glimpsed the depths of human sorrow and the resilience of the spirit, guided by the Reaper's unorthodox methods into a realm where fear and fascination intertwined. Thus, through the intercession of the enigmatic Alexander, known as the Reaper, the woman discovered peace and solace within the confines of her once tormented abode, where the shadows no longer whispered of restless spirits, but whispered of the mysteries that bind the realms of the living and the dead. After Alexander proposed a pact to resolve her haunting predicament, the woman hesitated momentarily, weighing the enigmatic terms against the relentless torment within her home. Ultimately, driven by desperation and the flickering hope for peace, she agreed to his terms, binding herself to fulfill certain conditions in exchange for his supernatural aid. Under the Reaper's guidance, the ritual unfolded with eerie precision, each gesture laden with significance that transcended the mundane. They navigated through obscure incantations and solemn rites, delving into the murky depths where the spirit's sorrow intertwined with the fabric of reality itself. The Reaper's presence loomed like a shadow over the proceedings, his mastery over the arcane weaving a fragile bridge between the worlds of the living and the dead. As the final echoes of their ritual faded into the silence of her once tormented abode, a profound shift rippled through the apartment. The spectral manifestations ceased their haunting cries, replaced by a tranquil stillness that settled like a balm over her troubled soul. The Reaper's dark silhouette lingered briefly, a silent testament to his fulfilled promise and the delicate equilibrium they had achieved. In the wake of their otherworldly collaboration, the woman found herself reborn. Freed from the specter's grasp, she embarked on a new chapter of life imbued with serenity and hope. The once haunted corners of her mind yielded to newfound happiness as she found love, married, and welcomed a child into the world. The nightmares that once plagued her faded into distant memory, replaced by the quiet joy of domestic bliss and the gentle laughter of her own flesh and blood. Thus, through the enigmatic pact with Alexander, known as the Reaper, she discovered not only deliverance from the supernatural shadows but also a profound understanding of resilience and the enduring power of human spirit. Her journey through fear and uncertainty had led her to a place of peace, where the scars of the past served as reminders of the strength forged in adversity. And as she cradled her newborn child in the warmth of their home, the echoes of the Reaper's ritual whispered faintly in the corners, a testament to the mysteries that bound the realms of the living and the dead. Some time had passed since the woman's life had settled into a serene rhythm, the once disturbing echoes of her haunted past fading like distant whispers in the night. Yet, on one fateful evening, a peculiar dream visited her sleep, casting a shadow over her newfound peace. In the dream, she found herself standing once more in the dimly lit confines of her apartment, where the air hung heavy with the weight of unresolved promises. The spectral vestiges of her past swirled around her, their ethereal forms shimmering with an unsettling familiarity. She felt a presence, subtle yet palpable, watching her from the shadows, unseen but keenly felt. As she wandered through the rooms that had once been battlegrounds against unseen forces, memories long buried stirred within her. The pact she had made with the Reaper surfaced like a forgotten specter, its terms etched into her consciousness with chilling clarity. A cold shiver traced its way down her spine as she realized the gravity of her commitment, the unspoken implications of their otherworldly bargain. Voices, distant and haunting, echoed through the corridors of her dream, whispers of obligations unfulfilled, debts unpaid. The walls seemed to close in around her, suffused with an eerie silence that spoke volumes of the pact she had sealed in desperation. Faces, blurred and indistinct, flickered at the edge of her vision, their eyes pleading, accusing. Awakening with a start, she found herself bathed in the dim glow of pre-dawn light filtering through her bedroom window. The remnants of the dream clung to her like a specter unwilling to release its grip. Her heart raced, her breaths shallow and hurried as she grappled with the unsettling revelation that her past, thought vanquished, still held sway over her present. In the quiet hours before dawn, the weight of her pact with the Reaper bore down upon her with renewed intensity. It was a reminder, stark and unyielding, that the boundaries between the mundane and the supernatural were thin, fragile threads stretched taut across the fabric of existence. And as she lay awake, grappling with the unsettling truth of her dream, she understood that some debts once incurred could never truly be settled. For in the shadows of that restless night, the woman realized that her journey through fear and redemption was far from over. The pact she had made, in all its enigmatic complexity, had woven her fate into the tapestry of the Reaper's realm, where promises made held the power to shape destinies and haunt souls.